Good morning, everyone. Just for the sake of time, I know people are still with the exhibitors, but we're going to get started. I would like to welcome you all to our 9th annual ALS Care and Research Symposium. It's kind of amazing to be saying 9th annual, but welcome. My name is Lori Baker-Horner. I am the Director of Care Services for the Wisconsin chapter, and I am just honored to welcome you. This is a really important event for the chapter because it really represents everything that the chapter is about. Chapter members, staff, board, all the research, all the programs, and just really to bring us all together. It's an extremely important event. And for all of us to really learn together that there is hope in a disease that sometimes, or I should say many times, feels hopeless. And we're bringing hope through an event like this, hope through research, hope through support and understanding, hope through developed connections with other people, the people around your tables, and hope that we know someday there will be a cure. And I've been with the chapter 16 years, and I really believe this is the brightest time. And I'm really excited for our program today and really feel that we're all going to learn something. And we're all going to come away very hopeful. Before we begin, I would like to introduce some individuals that are here with us today, just because I think it's good for you to know who's here, so if you'd like to reach out to them, that you can talk to them throughout the day. First of all, members of our board of directors are here today. If you could stand and just kind of wave, that would be great. Kathy Keppel, our board president. I know Mary Drummel was supposed to be here. I'm not sure if she's arrived yet, but she will be here. Jan Kaufman. I know she's around here somewhere. Tom Kettler. Joanne Blazing was here today, but she sends her best. She's the vice president of our board. And we also have members of our clinic teams from both Froedtert and the Milwaukee VA. And I'd like to just introduce them. First of all, from our center at Froedtert and Medical College, we have Cedric Dennis, the nurse coordinator. I know he hates this. Naya Fabian, Jody Antinoja, Jim Durno, Michelle McDonough, Marlette Shepker, and Katie Kutnick. Is Katie here? No? Oh. And from our Milwaukee VA ALS clinic, Tammy Suka, Megan Kilps, and Peggy Hoyt. And Keith Sorensen, our PV, oh, there he is. He's back there. And I know I did this to you guys last year, and I apologize for doing this again this year. But I just really appreciate the fact that they're here today, and I know they just ran in, so I think you know who I'm talking about. From the ALS MDA clinic at UW-Madison Hospital, we have Amy Stenulson, the social worker. Amy, where are you? Oh, there you are, right there. And Peggy Mead, the occupational therapist. So they came from Madison. We're so glad because it's all about partnerships, so welcome. And then Julie Chamberlain. Julie, are you here? There she is. Okay. Julie traveled here from Eau Claire, and Julie is the community outreach nurse from the Northwest ALS Support Group. And this is a really wonderful independent ALS group that's been in existence for over 20 years. And the group is based in Chippewa Falls and provides support and services to individuals in Northwest Wisconsin. But we've been really lucky, our chapter has been, to be able to partner with this wonderful group. And we partner with our equipment loan program and other services. So welcome, Julie. And we also, as you know already, we have a great group of exhibitors out with us today. Take some time to visit their tables if you can during lunch. They've got a lot of good information to share. And we're really appreciative of the support that they give our event. Many of them are return exhibitors, and they've already agreed. Many have combined their sponsorship to support our walk in October, so we're really grateful. And we have a very full program, so I want to get started. Feel free to help yourself to coffee, to do whatever makes you comfortable. we want to make sure that you're really comfortable. The temperature tends to fluctuate, so please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us or let us know if you get really cold, as sometimes we get ice cold all of a sudden. We don't need that. For housekeeping purposes, we do have a designated family restroom over to the side of the exhibitor hall, so please feel free, if you need a family restroom, you can utilize that. So to start us off, I have the pleasure of introducing our chapter executive director, Melanie Roach-Vicos. Melanie will be sharing some exciting news about upcoming events. The growth of the chapter and the services that we are able to provide is directly connected to the success of these events. And Melanie and her team, Susie and Luz, they've done an amazing job in just ensuring that we continue to grow as a chapter. And I, for one, know that Melanie is definitely someone that is hard to say no to. And that's a really good thing. And we are blessed to have her on our side. Melanie.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Care Services, for putting on this event, which is so important to people affected with ALS and their families. So your presence today really says a lot. It's also a great opportunity for Susie. We are all wearing black t-shirts so you know who we are, and Luz, to meet the families. A lot of times we see your names come across the office, and it's really an honor and a privilege for us to meet you in person, so thank you. Together, the three of us will be guiding you through the Walk to Defeat season, as well as the Chasing a Cure event, which will happen at Miller Park. I'd just like to start this talk off, and it's going to be really brief, by saying thank you. Our chapter continues to expand with new services we are able to offer, and it's all because of you. We could never do what we do without your support, dedication, and willingness to get involved. When people ask me, how come you're so successful, or what's the most successful part of your chapter, it's you. It's really hard to put into what our model is, except that it's the families, it's the people that continue to show up and get involved with our events. So from the bottom of my heart and our hearts, I cannot thank you enough, and I hope you know we could not do it without you. I would like to ask, how many people here have been to the Milwaukee Walk? If you could raise your hand. Oh, thank you. If you are a team captain, I'd like you to raise your hand, because Susie and Luz are going to divide up the room, and they're going to give you an invite to the first team kickoff party that we're going to have ever at the Hyatt. And this is a great opportunity for you to see the t-shirts that we have, get new ideas as a captain. And the whole idea of this event is release the hero within. Because to us, you are heroes, and you lead your team, and we could not do it without you. So you'll get this postcard, and we'd love to see you at this event. It'll be a really fun event. If you have not been to the walk but would be interested in being a captain, please raise your hand, because we'd love to have you at this event, and Luz will give you, and Susie will give you as well. Come, you'll learn everything you have to know about the walk. We'd love to have you. And it's just a really social, fun event. I also want to let you know, if you ever need any help registering your team, personalizing your team page, call us at the office. We are here to help and to do whatever we can. Finally, I'd like to just talk for a second about an event we're having this summer on July 19th. In your ALS bracelet, you have a pamphlet on it. It's called Chasing a Cure. It's at Miller Park, and it's a great event. Tickets include the ticket, a private concert, a tailgate concert by Chasen Mason, Sobelman Burger, Miller Beer, Jimmy Love. It's just a great way to show the brewers that we're supporting not only ALS, but we're together in the fight against ALS. So to end, I would just like to once again say thank you. We couldn't do this without you. To us, you are the heroes, and together we will find the needed answers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Melanie. Now I'm really honored to introduce our next speaker, Tom Kettler. Tom has been a member of our board of directors since 2010 and has really taken on a number of roles both within the chapter as a board member and chair of our public policy committee, but he also has appointments to various committees through our national association, and he's currently on the board of representatives of the National ALS Association representing the Wisconsin chapter. You will hear from Tom about what's happening in advocacy on a local and a national level, but if I know Tom, he will not offer too much about what a difference he has made in this role. I know the force behind Tom is his beautiful wife, Suzanne, who he supported through her journey with ALS until she passed in 2008. And that is why in introducing Tom today, I want to thank him for the number of hours he has committed to ensuring change and support for individuals and families with ALS. You make such a difference.
Thank you, Lori. It's a pleasure to be here again. I do really appreciate the opportunity to be able to represent the chapter and all of you in various roles of advocacy that we are pursuing. So it's a labor of love, but it's certainly a very much appreciated opportunity that you have afforded me to get out and try to make a difference. I think yesterday we had a luncheon meeting with Melanie. We had a dinner meeting last night with Dr. Bedlock and Dr. Barkhouse and Lori and Kathy Kippel, our president. And then this morning, of course, breakfast and lunch. So I think that it's probably very accurate to let you know that I actually work for food. So I am not, it's not that I'm unpaid, I'm getting fed. I'm getting fed very well, thank you. Purpose of advocacy is to make the public aware of this disease so that when we go to the elected representatives on the state or national level, and they have to make a decision when we ask them for funds for research or ask them to enact legislation to help us in fighting this disease, that they have to make the decision, are we going to support this or not? And if they know that the public back home is aware of this disease and is in favor of their support, it's going to make our job a lot easier to get a yes answer from those various representatives. The other purpose of advocacy is not just the political awareness, but the self-awareness to make the people with ALS aware of the various services that are available. We are fortunate here through the ALS Association, through the clinics, and as we expand our services statewide, to make these services available to the patients, their families, and caregivers. We also want to make you aware of how to participate in ALS research projects. And Dr. Barkhouse and Dr. Bedlack are prime leaders in that area. And Dr. Bedlack, I'm sure, will address that later on today. He is one of the preeminent advocates that we have on a national basis for the ALS community. Locally, and this, I'm going to sound like a broken record today, I'm going to give you a little history of the Wisconsin license plate bill. Back in 2011, with the help of a fellow ALS widower, Mary Hempel, we introduced the Wisconsin license plate bill through then Representative Paul Farrell in the Wisconsin Assembly. That was then deferred over to the Transportation Committee, Barry and I went down to Madison and testified before that committee. We thought when we came out of there, we thought this was a slam dunk. We thought we were going to have that bill passed with no tremendous difficulty at all. As it turned out, after we introduced our bill, 5 additional license plate bills were introduced. 3 of them were very non-controversial. A couple of them turned out to be controversial. And if you remember the political climate in Madison in 2011, they decided that rather than getting into another tussle, that they would simply not advance any of them out of committee. So it died in committee. We think we've got a little better approach this time. We're going to reintroduce the Wisconsin license plate bill, and that will be coming up very shortly. And we're going to have it jointly introduced on both sides of the legislature, Senate and the Assembly. Paul Farrow is now a senator, and he is going to represent it, introduce it on the Senate side, and Representative Joel Playfish is going to simultaneously introduce it on the Assembly side. So they are still working on budgetary issues. In fact, I think there's a meeting in Milwaukee today on the budget, but after that is done, they anticipate voting on the budget around the 25th of April, so just a few days. After that, the pressure's off a little bit. Other ancillary bills can start being introduced, and that's where we're going to come in. So when that happens, we're going to be going out to all of you via email, by the Hope line, and by carrier pigeon if we have to get you to sign or to send letters, emails, or phone calls to your individual representatives and in Washington so that we can get this license plate bill passed. 2 purposes of the license plate bill. Number 1 is awareness. That, of course, is what advocacy is all about. We want to make people aware of this disease. So if you're seeing license plates throughout the state of Wisconsin with that red A on them, you'll know what it's all about. Again, that goes back to awareness, back to the political action that we always want to try to prepare for. The second thing is that each time you order a license plate from Wisconsin and subsequently renew it each year, the association will receive $25. So in essence, what we're doing is setting up an annuity for the association to provide for care services and additional programs as we push out state and continue our adventure here in getting more and more services available for the ALS community in the state, the entire state of Wisconsin. So please watch for that. We're going to try and get this thing advanced and passed this year. On the national basis, national level, we take several trips to Washington. On an annual basis, we go out to the fly-in February, and in May, then we go to Washington and visit our congressmen and our senators and ask for the priorities that have been established by the National ALS Association. Back in, over the last few years, there have been 2 programs that have been introduced in the legislature, and they are standalone. They've become standalone legislation. Number 1 is the ALS Registry Act that was passed in 2008, and number 2 is the ALS Research Program through the Department of Defense. Now, they unfortunately we found out that various research that veterans are contracting ALS at a rate of approximately twice of the general population. And that got the attention of the military, and certainly got the attention of Congress. So in response to that, there was legislation passed that sets up direct funding for ALS research at the Department of Defense. So each year, though, that ALS registry and the Department of Defense funding have to be refunded. And those are the priorities that we are looking for when we go to Washington next month. And we're going to ask that Congress approve a $10 million fund for funding, or continuing to fund the ALS registry, and for continuing to fund the ALS research program through the Department of Defense. So those things actually, obviously are going to affect all of us locally. We want to keep that going. Now, with regard to the ALS registry, this is the largest research project, the ALS research project nationally, that has been undertaken. And it's ambitious, but it certainly is worthwhile. And the object is to have every patient register nationwide so that they can look for those commonalities, whether it be environmental or whether it be hereditary or geographical, so that it might give a clue on how to approach finding a cause and cure. Today we have Randy Young and Greg Fergut are sitting at the table out here. They have computers. If you have not registered on the ALS registry, we're going to ask you to see them before you leave today. They will help you register on the ALS registry program. It's extremely important. We want all of you to participate in it. So we have, there's a number of things that are being done on the national level. It's exciting stuff. It's interesting to go and listen to the various presentations on public policy. Also, to get research updates from folks such as Dr. Bedlack and other researchers who are extremely active in this community. We're very fortunate to have an absolutely fantastic brain trust working on this disease. And it's our job to keep finding funds to support those folks so they can continue their work. When we go to Washington, we are obviously lobbying. You see the pictures here. The top picture is from 2011. And Kathy Leash and her brother Jeff Reinhardt, sister Sarah Decker, and daughter Ann Leash accompanied us to Washington to visit our congressmen and our senators, and they just did a fantastic job for us. They're tremendous advocates. Last year, we had the privilege of having Peggy Dreesen and her daughter Lindsay. And Peggy is sitting right over here, the one with a huge smile. And they were just fantastic. By the end of the day, you're pretty tired because what we're asking Peggy and we ask Kathy to do is go in on all 10 meetings that we had on that one day. We go into the offices of the congressman. We either meet with the congressman or senator or their representatives, and they tell their story. Our meetings last only 10 or 15 minutes, but in that 10 or 15 minutes, we're asking our person with ALS to tell their story so that there's that personal connection, so the representatives understand what this disease does. It understands what it does to the families. And it is extremely effective. So far, we have always gotten funds from them. We may not get as much as we ask for, but we always get something to keep these programs going. So, and I want to share one story with you. I was there in February for the fly-in, and I went to Senator Ron Johnson's office, and his medical legislative aide, Liz Schwartz, said, "Tom, it's good to see you again. How is Peggy?" I said, "She's doing great. She's a fantastic advocate." She said, "I couldn't get her out of my mind." Mission accomplished. So But that's what we do. And today, what I would ask you to do to help us in this project, there are letters, and we've got them on the advocacy table here, but on each of your tables there are letters to our senators, Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin. I would ask each of you to fill those out. If you're from Wisconsin, if you're not from Wisconsin, feel free to take a copy and modify it for your own senators from your state, and feel free to use it. And if you will fill out those letters, and we want you to do two, one for Tammy Baldwin, one for Ron Johnson. And if you would get those done before lunch, we'll pick them up before lunch so we don't have to deliver them next month with gravy stains on them. So this year, we will be, again, going, or next month, we'll be going with John and Deanna Jekyll from Hayward. They're in District 7, which is Sean Duffy's congressional district. And we're trying to kind of spread the wealth around so that we can get to each congressman or congressional district and let them know just what we're about. So I do appreciate the opportunity. I thank you for your help. And we wish you nothing but the best. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom. I'm now have the honor of introducing our next speaker, who is familiar to probably most, if not all of you, Dr. Paul Barkhouse. Dr. Barkhouse is the medical director of our ALS Certified Center at Fredericton, the Medical College of Wisconsin, as well as the multidisciplinary ALS clinic at the Milwaukee VA Medical Center. Dr. Barkhouse is a professor of neurology at the Medical College of Wisconsin and section chief for neuromuscular diseases. He's a member of the Northeast ALS Consortium, the ALS Center Directors Group, and serves on the medical advisory board of the ALS Association, which we're very thankful for. Dr. Barkhouse's tenacity and commitment to ALS are the reasons that there are two ALS clinics in our area today. I think I mentioned Melanie doesn't take no for an answer. Here we have another one. He's never satisfied with the status quo and always feels there's room for improvement. And that's the reason our clinics are continually developing to benefit our patients and families. I'm very proud to introduce Dr. Paul Barkhouse.
I don't have any slides, so that can just be blank. I'm going to prove to my group here I can actually speak without a PowerPoint presentation. And I've always had a tough act. It seems at the Symposium now it's evolved into I'm sandwiched between the headline acts of Tom Kettler, our advocacy chief, who I call the senator. He's eminently qualified, except for two flaws. He has no scandals or duplicity, but I can live with that. And then, of course, our featured speaker. So what I am going to do just in these few minutes is just give you kind of a state of the program update, much like our political leaders do on an annual basis. The program continues to be very robust. We follow about things always change day to day. I just finished late last night before I had to run off to dinner with our chapter higher-ups and our guest speaker, seeing two new patients, although happily I had a 50% success rate because I don't think one of them has ALS, fortunately, so we'll work that up a little further. The other person unfortunately does. So it looks like we follow about maybe 230 between the VA and Freighter clinics. both hospitals remain very supportive, which sounds like a little cliche-ish, but as Dr. Bedlack will tell you, we compare notes along with other directors. Getting institutional support today is becoming increasingly tough. So we are blessed that Freighter has continued to support us heavily, and the VA, for reasons Tom mentioned with the service connection for ALS, they've kind of sort of now obligated to do that. With that on the VA, Keith, where are you? Are you there? Yes, and a special salute to Keith Sorensen, who will be retiring in the not too distant future. I'm a little jealous. He's beating me out the door, but I wish him luck. But he's fought the good fight here for many of our vets and continues to do so. I think he set several records in getting benefits. I think the fastest was about 24 hours, right? 36, so it was right around there. So that's pretty darn good in a federal bureaucracy. Now, projects over the last year, we participated with ALSA, the National Association, in a cost of clinical care, multidisciplinary clinic care study. I haven't heard anything about the data yet. I think it's still being scrutinized, analyzed, and so forth, but we were one of, I forget how many sites picked, about 15, and we had to have timesheets and so forth because we're hoping this will be a positive outcome, showing that multidisciplinary clinic approach is very cost effective, in addition to being actually quite successful. And of all the things we can provide patients for improved survivorship, the research shows in a couple of studies, one of which from Ireland, that the survivorship in a multidisciplinary clinic is very, very much enhanced when they're in a multidisciplinary clinic. It's not that we're smarter than the individual practitioner, it's just the collective wisdom, shall we say, of the various health providers, whether it's a physician, the nurse, the physical occupational therapist, nutritionist, I have to mention everyone I'm seeing there, social work, respiratory, in sort of real time, and then making recommendations really puts things in a very synchronized mode, so there's not this staggered approach to management. So that's proven very successful, and we hope it proves financially successful. My pet project, the Munich's or motor unit number indexing, as a way of kind of counting motor units as an estimate, not an actual count. Since I'm an electrician by training in EMG, all of you remember me, or not all, but some, needling you, literally, has been pretty successful also in the past year. We have had another paper published, and we made 2 presentations in Chicago on it, one from our group in particular here in Milwaukee, and then other with our data that we collaborated with colleagues from Switzerland and Portugal. So we're hoping that may prove to be a measure that will be useful in drug trials, as well as other things like measuring strength and breathing and so forth. Also, I've been collaborating with a colleague down at Northwestern, a PhD in biomedical engineering, doing high-density EMG studies, which is some of you have participated in as well, which we appreciate. That's probably one of the easiest projects. You're just going to lay there, and he does all the recordings there with his little electrodes that he just tapes on your hand or arm, and does his measurements, but I don't have time to go into all the sophisticated detail of that, but it's quite fascinating as a more of a basic science type approach, research or engineering. We finished the tamoxifen creatine study, which again, some of you here may have participated in. I know I got one person here, and that data is being analyzed. I don't think, unfortunately, it's going to prove out, but the votes are still being counted, so we expect to hear pretty much any time. I thought we would know by now, but like anything else in research, it does take time. Also, speaking, referring to what Lori talked about me pushing and so forth, I pushed her, and she put together a nice presentation at the international meeting this past Chicago, another sort of homegrown, if you will, research project looking at quality and end of life, and that was received well, and I'm hoping that as soon as I get through some other projects, go back and push her some more to write it up as a paper, because there's not a lot on that. And so I think that's worth pursuing. Our current project is one called a cytokinetics company. It's got a sort of letter and number, typical salad, so I won't go through that compound's name. At any rate, it's not a cure for ALS or intended to be, but it's sought to help excitation of the skeletal muscle, so more of an adjunct medication. So we are recruiting in that, and one of our study coordinators, where's Lynn? Raise her there, in that Kelly green, if that's the right color, sweater there. She is our research coordinator. If you're interested, you can make your way over there and talk to her. There are criteria like every other drug study as far as duration of disease, usually as one, strength and so forth, and breathing strength. So it's, and also not having any other significant medical illnesses. So that, and that's pretty much across the board in any drug study. And also, I should take a poll, because Dr. Bedlack's going to pick up on this. How many patients do we have in the room? I know we have lots of families, so we have a few. Yeah, come on now, get those hands up. How many have been in a drug trial? Oh, we got a couple. And then how many would consider at least being in a drug trial? All right, so there you have it. We took a straw poll, Dr. Bedlack, because he will talk to you that it's such a low enrollment, and we're looking into some of the reasons for that. And there are many, of course. It's not a straightforward issue. So I think that is about all, let me see, I have to say, except also to reinforce what Lori said, to please spend a few moments during your coffee break to pass through the exhibitors and thank them, because their significant support helps support this project today, as well as others that we have throughout the course of the year. So, having said that, get to my next scrap of paper here. Dr. Bedlack is our guest speaker this year. It's always hard to pick speakers, and I think I intentionally saved him up a little bit. I didn't bring him out earlier, so it's always hard to know timing and all that. But I've known Rick for several years through our work in ALS at the national level, in the ALS research group and the Northeast ALS Consortium, among other bodies. But those are the two principal ones. He's a native of Connecticut originally. He wound up down at Duke in North Carolina in 1995, a number of years after I had left. And he started out as an intern in medicine and was the guy who never left. He stayed on the faculty, and which is a tribute, because Duke doesn't suffer fools gladly. And he's gone up the ranks quite nicely, and currently is a tenured associate professor there. Neurology is not a department yet. They keep talking about it, and he tells me it's actually going to be a department, an independent new state within Duke's medical school as of July, I guess. So then he'll be a member of a true department, but now he's a member of a section, as I was many years ago. You were an associate. So he's the section chief at the VA down there at Durham, which is right across the street from the campus of the medical school. and he's the director of the ALS program there, both for the VA as well as at Duke itself, and then he's participated in doing a number of outreach programs. I think all of us kind of have our special skills, and Dr. Bedlick has many, but one of the skills he has is he's a good consensus builder. So, and when he gets up here, you'll see why. Each of his slides will have something nugget on there for you to learn, but the thing he perceived and kind of ran with a ball, so to speak, was the issue of complementary and alternative medicines that many of you hear about, and some of you may actually participate in and ask us about in clinic. Should I take this supplement? Should I go and have all my fillings pulled and replace them with titanium or some other recommended substance? Or should I get retested for Lyme disease? Should I be taking vitamin E versus vitamin X, et cetera, et cetera? And while I'm maybe sounding a little facetious or a little bit sarcastic, I'm really not, because these are real problems, not problems in the sense of problem, but issues that we have to have an open dialogue about. Most of these supplements, in the case of supplements, are fairly benign in the sense that they're not going to cause a major problem in one's body, whether you have ALS or you just take it because you think it's good for your health. Americans have become addicted to this, and it's a huge, huge industry, and it's not regulated by the FDA. These are made in little huts out in the desert somewhere usually, and you hope that the ingredients are pure and the company is reputable, and some indeed are. So I'm not picking on them per se, but there's a whole spectrum of these. And I think in medicine we have to be careful and not poo-poo this, just like the more basic one, chiropractors versus medicine. I tell patients, I don't get a Pavlovian junkyard dog response when you say chiropractor. I work pretty well with them. I've treated some of them and their families, and I'm respectful, and I think they do provide some valuable medical services in the right time and the right place. So everything has to be taken in balance, and I think one of the things Dr. Bedlick has done is try to approach this in a very balanced, thoughtful way, so that people don't think we're just simply looking for ways to dismiss it because we're right and everybody else is wrong. And I think that's an important approach to medicine that keeps us not only human but humane, and I think that's the right way to approach it. So I know I'm finishing a little bit short, but then that's another goal I've always tried to achieve, not always successfully, is talk under my limit. And that will allow a little more time for Dr. Bedlick, because I know his talk will generate a lot of interest and questions. I don't think anyone's going to be falling asleep. And we encourage you to, afterward, we'll certainly have a few moments to field questions. So without further ado, come on up. And also, he is a guy, when he goes for advocacy, when he walks into a politician's office, they will not forget him. Because he's definitely dresses far more specially than I do. Don't be frightened by his shirt. He is not a friend of Wayne LaPierre. He's actually a rather peaceable guy. I didn't ask you what the symbol of that. He'll have to tell you why the shirt there. And this is, of course, different from yesterday, but it's always intriguing. Patients come to see me because they want to know what bow tie I'm going to wear next time. And he expanded on this quite much more. So, Lori, I'll let you get the PowerPoint up, and I will decant.
Thank you, Paul. It's important to remember that sometimes a shirt is just a shirt. I'm not trying to make any statements here. So seriously, thank you very much, Paul, for the invitation and the hospitality of you and your team, as well as the ALSA Wisconsin chapter. This is my first time in this part of the country. I can't say much for your spring weather, but surprisingly, I really like your food. I've had several of your microbrews and some of your cheeses and some of your sausage, even a little bit of your custard. It's all been delicious. I'm actually thanking the Lord that I'm getting out of here today because I wouldn't be able to fit into these clothes much longer if I stayed another bit. So I'm going to present to you with a little project I've been working on for the past 4 years, which I call ALS Untangled, and I've nicknamed it the X-Files of ALS. As I look around the room, I see a lot of young people here. Hopefully most of you remember this TV show, The X-Files. It was my favorite show. It ran for about 10 years, and it also spawned 3 movies. The premise of the show was there was a guy named Fox Mulder. When he was a kid, he watched his sister get kidnapped. His sister's name was Samantha. And the way he remembered it, she was kidnapped by aliens. And so he spent the rest of his life investigating reports of alien life and similarly strange happenings. And each one of those investigations was the subject of a show. And usually Mulder would find some rational explanation for the report. Well, this was my Samantha. She was a 60-year-old university professor that I had to diagnose with ALS, pretty obvious case. At the time that I saw her, she was pretty early in the course of her disease. She just had some mildly slurred speech and a little bit of difficulty swallowing. Very mild arm and leg weakness, still independent in her activities of daily living and able to walk. No obvious problems with her thinking. After I sat down and educated her about ALS, I presented her with some of the things we had to offer that were appropriate for her stage, like Riluzole and multidisciplinary care. I also asked her if she wanted to participate in one of my open research studies. So she opted for the first 2 things, but she declined the research study, saying that instead she was going to pursue something called the Diana Protocol, something that she'd heard about in an online video from the Christian Broadcasting Network. So for the purposes of this talk today, I'm going to refer to things like this as AOTs, alternative or off-label therapies. And I'll define those as non-mainstream therapies that are being advertised to either slow, stop, or reverse ALS progression without a lot of good evidence for that. Well, I think it's safe to say that the look on my face the first time I heard a patient tell me this was very similar to that of Fox Mulder when he came face to face with real live aliens for the first time. And the first thing I did is I asked myself, I wonder how common this is, that patients think about doing this. Turns out that surveys tell us it's actually very common in ALS. Whether we survey patients or we survey the doctors that take care of them, it looks like a little over half the patients with ALS will try at least one AOT over the course of their illness. Why might that be? Well, as most of you know, unfortunately, ALS is still a devastating, incurable, and almost always fatal disease with few treatment options. The things that we have to treat ALS right now, and even the things that we have in our research studies, we think might, at best, slow the progression of ALS a bit. Patients, of course, want to believe that there's something better out there, just like in this old X-Files poster. I want to believe. And when you ask them, why are you trying some of these things, 10% say they think they're going to find a cure through one of these, 20% say they think they're going to find something that will actually make them better, and 50% think they're going to find something that's going to slow their disease down significantly. Other answers that people give are that they feel pressured from their peers, meaning that their family and friends want them to try something. And then finally, a very common thing that I hear is, well, I already have ALS. I mean, what further harm can come to me? The other thing to add into the mix of why people try these is the internet. So the internet has made it easier than ever to find AOTs. If you go on Google and you search ALS treatments, in 2011 you would have gotten 43 million hits. A year later you would get 80 million hits. Now, not all of these things that come up are AOTs, but many of them are. The other thing about the internet is it's kind of like the Wild West. There's nobody out there setting down any kind of laws. If you have something to sell, you can say pretty much anything you want about it. And so the proponents of many of these AOTs make some very intriguing and attractive claims. Commonly used phrases include things like clinically proven and perfectly safe. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. This is from a website for a product called MotoTab. And as you can see here, some of the things that are said about this product are very interesting. Most probably, you're here in search of a treatment for motor neuron disease. Rest assured, your search is over. MotoTab is the world's most relied upon and clinically proven natural treatment for motor neuron disease. Well, that statement's interesting because when a patient pointed this out to me, not only had I never heard about it, but no one else that I asked in the entire field had ever heard of this. Also, if you look over here in the lower right-hand corner, it says that there's actually a guarantee. MotoTab is completely guaranteed. You are at absolutely no risk for trying this. So what's wrong with all this? I mean, it's all kind of funny, we laugh about it. Well, the problem is that the information that's out there to support these extraordinary claims ranges anywhere from completely absent to highly flawed to just completely bogus and inaccurate. Another slogan from an X-Files poster, trust no one on the internet. Let me give you some examples. How could you make a claim on the internet and have no information to support it? It doesn't seem like it would be possible. But let me show you how that works. So here we go back to the MotoTab website, and you see that they have this paragraph over here with the big blue arrow that says they have a study to prove their claims. Just click this link for details. You click it and it comes up, clinical study will soon be posted here. Now, if you look back and see when this website was created, it was actually 2003. So I don't know what kind of study takes 10 years to get completed and posted, but it must be really quite extraordinary. The makers of MotoTab actually do have a link to another website, which seems to be created by a different group, that does some sort of testing of their product. It compares MotoTab to two other products for motor neuron disease that most of us have never heard of. One is called Neurotax, and the other is called Ronatin. And you can see in the bottom of this graph that there are various things that they're testing these products for. Traditionally proven, clinically tested, worldwide usage, and short-term focus. There's no definition for what any of these mean, nor is there any definition for the number of check marks that each one of these things seems to get from this organization. And finally, the strangest thing of all is that MotoTab is the only one that has 5 checks for clinically proven, and yet when they rank the order of these things in terms of effectiveness, it comes out second. Very strange. It's much more difficult for patients and families who don't have a scientific background to sort through flawed information, and it's actually much more common that there's some information about a product. It's just that the information is flawed. So here's a real tricky example. This is a graph that came off a website for a clinic which was called the X-Cell Center. At one time, this was the most popular and profitable clinic for patients with ALS to receive stem cells in the world. Patients flocked to this clinic in Germany to have bone marrow biopsies. Stem cells were isolated from bone marrow and reportedly injected back into the patient's spinal fluid. And these were the preliminary results for what they were doing over there. So this looks like a group of 53 patients with ALS who had some sort of evaluation and were classified as deteriorating, no change, improved, or strongly improved. And what you can see here is the great majority of patients were either stable or improved after receiving this therapy, which is atypical for ALS. And so you ask yourself, what exactly was this measurement they were making? It's nowhere listed on the website, but if you call, they will tell you that what they were doing was actually calling the patients at their homes, typically within a couple of weeks from when they got home from the X-Cell Center, and asking them, how you doing? You think you're worse, the same, better, or a lot better? Well, there's something that's called a placebo effect, okay? Anyone that has a terrible disease and tries a new therapy is going to want that therapy to work. And in fact, it's been shown that the more expensive the therapy, the more invasive the therapy, the harder it is to get, the greater the chances of having a placebo effect. A placebo effect is also most likely to occur shortly after a treatment has been initiated. So this treatment satisfies all those criteria for placebo effect. It's expensive. It's $25,000 to get this done. It hurts. You get a bone marrow biopsy and a spinal tap. It's hard to get. You have to travel all the way to Germany. And they're asking patients this question very shortly after they get back. Okay? So most likely, this was nothing more than a placebo effect. And then finally, there's the last category, and this one may be the toughest of all. It's when someone makes a very bold and seemingly inarguable statement that's just completely wrong. So this is from the website of maybe the most interesting of all the different therapies that ALS Untangled has investigated. This is from the website of a person named Dean Kraft. He's an energy healer from New York City. He doesn't exactly know how his treatment works, but he puts his hands on people, energy comes out, and people get better. And his website is really a treasure trove of very mysterious stories. One of the most interesting is that of Nelda Boos, who reportedly was diagnosed with ALS at an academic medical center, progressed to the point where she was paralyzed, went to Dean Kraft for 2 years, had his treatment, and then was completely well. And here at the bottom of this paragraph, it says, "This was the first case on the medical books of Lou Gehrig's ever going into full remission. It was unequivocal proof that the laying on of hands can indeed reverse terminal illnesses that have no treatment, no cure, and no hope." Well, the first time I read that early in the course of my career, I actually had the goosebumps. As I said to myself, did I just stumble onto the cure for ALS? Am I going to be at the International Symposium next year proposing the cure for ALS is to go to Dean Kraft and have him put his hands on you? Well, we did a little bit of research, and we found out that very rarely ALS actually does get better. There are cases in the medical books of people being diagnosed with ALS by all the latest diagnostic criteria, getting worse, and then for unexplained reasons, getting better. And I've actually seen one of these now in the past few years, so I really do believe that it exists. So the statement is wrong. The other big problem here, other than just the information itself, is that there are real harms that can come to people above and beyond ALS when they pursue these kinds of things. First of all, there's financial harms. Some of these things cost hundreds, some of them cost thousands, some of them cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you can have ALS and be bankrupt. Okay? There's psychological harms. People with ALS, they go to a mainstream clinic, they hear the unfortunate grim reality of this disease, and then they contact one of the people selling one of these things and they're told, that's all wrong, that's all old news. Nowadays, if you come to our clinic, we can actually make you better. And then inevitably 6 or 12 months later, when folks realize that what they tried didn't work, you can imagine what they feel like. There's physical harms. So despite the fact that many of these websites say perfectly safe, ALS Untangled in its investigations has found evidence of blood clots, infections, heart attacks, and even deaths occurring in response to some of these therapies. Maybe the most famous example of a physical harm that came to someone who pursued an AOT was not a patient with ALS. It was actually a young boy with a different neurological illness called ataxia telangiectasia, another devastating, progressive, incurable, and fatal neurodegenerative disease. His parents searched the world for some sort of treatment that could be offered for his condition, and they found a stem cell clinic in Russia that said that they were curing people with that disease. All they had to do is raise $20,000 and get an injection of stem cells. So they did. They had a big fundraiser, they raised $20,000, they took their child to this clinic, they got stem cells. They came back and not only did their child continue to progress, but also started having headaches, which are not part of that disease. His neurologist here did an MRI, which is shown in this picture, and you can see at the end of that arrow that there's something abnormal in his brain. It's a brain tumor. So surgeons went in and biopsied the brain tumor, and guess what? It was comprised of someone else's cells, which means that his family took him to Russia, paid $20,000 to have him injected with tumor cells. Okay? And then finally, maybe most subtle of all, there are scientific harms that come from people pursuing AOTs. And that has to do with this topic of enrollment that Paul mentioned. Enrollment is surprisingly low in ALS research studies. Less than 10% of patients with ALS actually ever enroll in a research study. If you look at the enrollment rate, we're bringing patients in at a rate of about 2 patients per site per month in the trials that we do. And that has not changed over the past 30 years. Now, why is that? Well, it turns out that after several years of looking at this, it appears the problem is with what are called doctor factors and patient factors. So these are the kind of things I mean when I say doctor factors. Many doctors don't even know what the research options are for their patients. Many doctors feel like if they talk to their patients about research and their patient enrolls, that they will lose control over what happens with their patient, or that they will have extra work, like extra paperwork to do. And finally, many doctors just have doubts about some of the research studies that we're doing. They're just not very excited about them. This problem is not unique to ALS. One of my favorite quotes that illustrates this is this one in the red here from a Harris poll that was done in 2005. 96% of neurologists who treat a different disease, Parkinson's disease, believe that clinical trials are necessary. But more than 60% have never referred one of their patients for a trial. And in fact, more than half of those surveyed said they even talk about research in only about 10% of patients. So a lot of doctors out there are not even talking about research as part of their visit. Then there's also patient factors. So many times patients don't know what the research options are. Many times patients are appropriately concerned about the burdens of research trials. They have to drive long distances. They have to get poked and prodded in uncomfortable ways. Patients are afraid that they might run into unexpected costs for being in a research study. I've had patients ask me, what happens if I get hurt during the research study? Who pays for that? Well, believe it or not, most insurance companies, including Medicare, have language that says they pay. They will pay if you have a medical complication that arises during a clinical trial. Fear of being a guinea pig, that's another one that comes up when you ask patients why they say no to a research study. And when you ask them to explain that a little more, they say, I'm afraid if I sign that piece of paper, that means you can do anything you want to me. And I'd like to have some say over what happens. Now, why would patients think that? They would think that because that actually happened at one time, including in the United States. Once upon a time, there were studies being conducted here, the most famous of which was in Tuskegee, Alabama, where patients who signed up for a research study were being deceived, and things were being done to them without their knowledge. And in that study, poor African-American farmers who had syphilis actually had treatment for syphilis, which could have cured it, withheld. Because the real purpose of the study was to see what happened to people who had syphilis over the course of their lives. So these folks actually progressed and died from a disease that was treatable right here in this country. No, but nowadays that can't happen. We have incredible amounts of oversight, and we have to tell you in great detail every single thing that could possibly happen to you in a research study. Otherwise, our institutions don't let us do it. Patients also sometimes choose an alternative therapy instead of coming into a research study. And in fact, when you ask ALS clinicians who run research studies about this, they say that 50% of their eligible patients turn down a research opportunity in favor of an AOT that they read about on the internet. So what happens when patients don't enroll? Well, first of all, if Samantha decided she wasn't going to come into a study because she was going to do the Deanna protocol instead, she would be depriving herself of the benefits that come from enrollment. These include hope, altruism, which means doing something for the greater good. And interestingly, there's even evidence that patients who come into research trials medically do better than patients who don't. We don't know why that is, whether it's the hope and altruism that somehow allow them to do medically better, or whether it's because they're in front of a doctor more often than they would be if they didn't come into a research study. Also, if Samantha decides not to come in, that means our trials take a little longer than they should. If this keeps happening, it means our trials might actually have to be terminated because they're not enrolling well. And it means that if we do finish a study and only a small percentage of patients with ALS are in the study, we don't know whether the results of that study apply to everyone with ALS or only to that small group of patients. The bottom line is that because of this enrollment problem, It is going to take us longer to find the cure for ALS than it should. So what do we do about this? Turns out there's 4 models by which decisions get made in the doctor-patient relationship. The oldest model, which dates back to the very beginning of medicine, is called paternalism. And there, the doctor is acting as a parent or guardian for their patient. They are defining the values and goals of the patient and telling the patient what to do in order to accomplish those goals. So if I was going to use a paternalistic model to influence my patient Samantha, I would say, you know, Samantha, that Deanna protocol is not a good idea. I don't want you to do that. I want you to come into a research study. A newer model is called autonomy, and that's actually been bolstered by the internet, where patients can now Google their symptoms and figure out what their diagnosis might be, and even Google their diagnosis to figure out what their treatment options are. In that model, patients are completely in charge of defining values and goals. And the role of the doctor is simply to help the patient get what they want. So we're kind of like vending machines in that model. So if Samantha was going to be treated in that way, she would tell me she wanted to do the Deanna protocol, and there would be no further discussion. I'd say, just let me know if I can help. There are some newer models which are in between these 2 extremes. One is called consumerism, and the other is called shared decision making. In both of those models, a patient's values and goals are at the forefront, as they should be. But the doctor is allowed to have a little bit of input. So in consumerism, the purpose of the doctor is simply to give the pros and cons of that particular decision that the patient is contemplating. And in shared decision making, the doctor gives not only that information as an encyclopedia might do, but also says, you know, based upon my years of experience, this is what I think you should do. So they're allowed to give an opinion as well. It turns out that most patients, and most doctors too, prefer shared decision making. The other nice thing about shared decision making is that it's associated with better compliance. It makes sense if you and your doctor have had a discussion and you're both comfortable with it, that whatever that treatment is that you're going to pursue, you're more likely to actually stay on it if you believe in it. And with better compliance, we get better health outcomes. So what's the problem? Well, shared decision making takes more time. It sure would take me a lot less time if I just said to Samantha, don't do this, or if I just said to Samantha, hey, great, good luck to you. It takes a little more time to have a back and forth discussion to actually investigate what it is that Samantha's asking me about, to tell her the pros and cons, and then to give her an opinion. And time in medicine is becoming more and more scarce. But what if we shared our shared decision making as a community? So this idea came to me in 2007 when I was sitting at the International Symposium, and I saw a presentation by this guy, Leonard Vandenberg. His patients at that time were asking him about a clinic that was in China at the Beijing West Hospital and Rehabilitation Center. And in that clinic, there was a doctor named Dr. Huang who was injecting fetal olfactory epithelial cells into the brain of patients with ALS with a needle. And he was claiming that this was safe and that 50 to 70% of his patients who came there were improving. So Dr. Vandenberg decided to systematically investigate this the way a scientist would investigate any other theory that they heard about. Got all the information he could about the clinic. He actually went there himself, talked to Dr. Huang, watched Dr. Huang treat some patients, and Dr. Vandenberg himself followed 7 of the patients that went there to see what happened to them. And then he took it one step beyond. Instead of just keeping the information between him and his patients, he made it public. So everyone else who was asking their doctors the same question could see the results of this systematic investigation, which was terrific. What he found was that there was only a very brief subjective benefit, which was probably a placebo effect in 2 patients, nothing long-lasting, nothing that could be measured objectively. Furthermore, there were real harms that were coming to patients. He found in just those 7 patients a blood clot, a pneumonia, and a respiratory failure and death that happened very shortly after the procedure. And finally, Dr. Huang never published the cost of this, which was $25,000 per injection. So I thought, what if we could replicate this and do it in a systematic way? And I created this program to try to do that. It's called ALS Untangled. I started it in 2009 with the help of my colleagues in the North American ALS Research Group, or ALSRG. There's 3 parts to this. The first is, how do we get our information from patients about what things they're interested in? The second is, how do we actually do the investigations? And the third is, how do we get the word out there to everybody else? So the inputs come into us by lots of different methods. They can come in by face-to-face meetings that patients have with their doctors, where their doctors afterward call or email me and ask me about the thing that their patient asked them about. Patients can email me directly. My email's all over the internet. And we're using something called Twitter, which is my favorite. The nice thing about Twitter is that you don't actually need anybody's address. All you need is a keyword. So if you go home today and you hear about something on the internet tonight that you want ALS Untangled to investigate, you can go on Twitter, register for an account, and send out a text message that says, ALS Untangled, can you tell me about the effects of Starbucks coffee on ALS? And tomorrow, when I search Twitter to see if anyone out there in the world is asking ALS Untangled any questions, I will find your question, even if you didn't send it to me. So when you're on Twitter, you have followers. And we started with about 130 followers in our first year, and we've steadily grown. We're now up to more than 1,000 followers. So we hit a milestone this month by going over the number 1,000, which is pretty exciting. It's exciting until you realize that Lady Gaga has 33 million Twitter followers. I will say, though, she hires a professional stylist, and I have to come up with these outfits myself. So she has a big advantage. Twitter's getting pretty busy, too. I never anticipated that we might be actually getting tweets from around the world every day, which is roughly the frequency that they're coming in now. As you can imagine, with all these folks following us and all these tweets, the list of things we're investigating is getting pretty long. In fact, it's falling off the bottom of our website now. It's all the way up to 64 different things that we're trying to investigate at this present time. How do we do our reviews? Well, just like Fox Mulder on the X-Files, I'm blessed to have a great team around me that helps. So our team has grown from 38 clinicians and scientists from across 4 countries to where we are now, which is 85 clinicians and scientists from across 10 different countries. We communicate with each other now by email, and we've got a very structured way that we do these reviews. So if you're asking me about a particular clinic, the first thing we do is try to contact the person who's running that clinic, and we try to contact them 3 different ways: email, telephone, and as a last resort, snail mail. We try to get everything that the clinic is giving to patients to review it. We try to review the clinic website. We do a PubMed search to find out if the person running the clinic or that clinic has ever published any articles in a scientific journal. We do a Google search to look at blogs and to look in the news to see what's out there about this thing. We poll the members of our ALS Untangled team to find out if any of the 85 of us have any patients that are trying that. And if so, if those patients will give us permission to look at their records, which usually contain objective outcome measures like ALS functional rating scales and pulmonary functions and weight. We review a website called Patients Like Me. Most of you probably know what that is. It's an amazing online community where folks with unusual diseases like ALS can go, register, interact with other folks to find out what kind of things they're doing about their disease, and also track their outcome measures. So we can go on there and find out if anyone's reporting that they're using that particular thing and what the outcome measures that they're reporting on the website look like. And then finally, we try to visit the clinic so that we can actually talk to the person who's doing the therapy face-to-face. We can actually watch them interacting with patients, and we can look through the records of the clinic's quote-unquote best successes. We've got a form that we bring to clinic. We're asked very specific questions when we get there. I won't go through this in detail. And then finally, once we have something that we all agree on as far as a document with information in it, we have to publish it so everyone can see it. We've got an agreement with the main journal in our field, which is called Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis. These articles are the only things that are published in that journal for free. So whenever the journal comes out, most of the articles you have to pay for. ALS Untangled articles are always free. These are group authored. So at the end of the article, there's a list of all the 85 names of ALS Untangled with a statement that says this paper represents a consensus of those weighing in. Opinions are not necessarily shared by every investigator in this group. And that's simply because it's impossible to get 85 people to agree on everything that's written. We're happy if we can at least get a consensus to say, yeah, I can live with this. The articles are about 1,000 words. There's a very specific format to them. We start by telling you what it is we're investigating, where the idea came from, does the rationale for this idea make any sense in ALS, how would a person with ALS get this, what kind of effectiveness data are out there in animals and people, what kind of safety data are out there, how much does this thing cost, and then finally, based upon all this black and white information, what is our recommendation about it? So now we're up to 19 published reviews. We did one on iPlex, one on the Hickey Wellness Center, several on stem cell therapies, one on something called Marty Murray's method, one on goat serum, one on blue-green algae, one on Lutamax, one on Dean Kraft, one on bee venom, one on Mototab, coconut oil, cannabis, 2 on Lyme disease, 1 on Prevagen, and 1 on sodium chloride. So now I'd like to tell you about some of the surprising lessons that I've learned running this program for the past 4 years. When I first started, I was pretty sure that the people that I met that were selling these things to patients with ALS were going to be like the Wild West snake oil salesman. And we have met a few people like that. The most famous is a guy named Larry Stowe, who was the proponent of something called the Stowe-Morales Protocol. This was actually an investigation that ALS Untangled did in partnership with 60 Minutes. They called us and asked if we would help with this. So this gentleman was calling himself a doctor at a clinic in Mexico where he was injecting patients with quote-unquote stem cells. We don't know for sure exactly what it was. The treatment cost $100,000 per injection, and he was on camera saying to a person in a wheelchair that if they did this, they would be out of the wheelchair in a few months and back to normal probably in 6 months. That he was working with several American institutions, working with the FDA, and that this would probably soon be approved for everybody with ALS because it was working so well. Well, with the help of 60 Minutes, we learned that Larry Stowe is not a doctor. The medical degree on his wall was forged. He'd never been to that institution. He'd never been in contact with any of the institutions that he quoted. The FDA had never heard of him. And in fact, after the 60 Minutes show came out, which you can still watch online, it's called 21st Century Snake Oil, Larry Stowe disappeared for a while. But I'm happy to say the FBI did finally find him, and he's now in prison. What about our friends at Mototab? We talked in the beginning about how strange this website was, the missing information, the odd external link with some sort of strange studies that were done. Well, this product is put out by a company called Oslo Health Solutions out of Oslo, Norway. And they did not respond to any of our attempts to contact them to get more information. But in our Google search of Oslo Health Solutions, we found something interesting, which is that this company has dozens of virtually identical websites which are word for word the same, except for the beginning of the product they're selling. So they have Peritab for peripheral neuropathy, Serotab for syrinx, Osteotab for osteomyelitis, Amylotab for amyloidosis, MDTab for muscular dystrophy. All of them, of course, have the same link, clinical study to be posted soon. And they all have an external link to this group that does these comparisons, which is the Society for the Promotion of Alternative Health, which is located in the UK. So we Googled that group, and it turns out that they also have dozens of virtually identical websites comparing a product from Oslo Health Solutions that ends in tab to one that ends in tax and one that ends in tin. And in every instance, the comparisons come out exactly the same. We learned from one of our patients that there's a way to figure out who owns a particular website. There's something called a who is function that anybody can use. And it turns out that all the websites from Oslo Health Solutions and all the websites from the Society for the Promotion of Alternative Health are owned by the same family whose address is in Pakistan. So that was very interesting. But there is another group of people out there that are selling these things, and I call these people true believers. I don't think they're snake oil salesmen. I think they actually really believe that they have something that helps patients with ALS. One of those is this guy, Dr. Joe Hickey. He runs a chelation clinic on Hilton Head, South Carolina. Chelation is an attempt to get rid of heavy metals that are in the body. Now, how do I know he's a true believer? Well, I spent 3 days with him and his wife. And the first thing they did when I got there is showed me the inside of their mouths to prove that they had all their fillings pulled. And the second thing they did is show me that a couple times a week, they actually, when the clinic closes, they chelate each other. They pull the metals out of each other's body with the same treatment that they're giving to patients. The other thing I learned is that some of the folks who are selling these things do some stuff really well that mainstream doctors can learn from. So I watched Dr. Hickey interview and examine several of his patients, and then I had a chance to spend some time with those patients separately. And one of the questions I asked them is, why are you here? And the most common answer I got was, we went to mainstream ALS clinics, famous ALS clinics, and the doctor there was gloom and doom. They hardly ever even looked us in the eye. The doctor there didn't want to hear about any of the theories that we had read about on the internet. They just poo-pooed them. And in fact, when we called or emailed, sometimes it was days or weeks, or sometimes we never got a response back at all to our questions. Now, Dr. Hickey was the exact opposite of all that. He would walk into the room with a big smile and an upbeat voice. And when his patients would say that they might have felt a little bit better, Dr. Hickey would be a huge cheerleader for that. When his patients would ask about something they read on the internet, he was all for it. There was never any sort of investigation of what it was. I remember watching a patient come in and they said, I might be a little bit better, but I'm wondering now, could this be Lyme disease? I read that Lyme disease could cause ALS. And Dr. Hickey said, you know what? I read the same thing. You want me to treat you with some antibiotics? Here's a prescription for some antibiotics for Lyme disease. And of course, at the end of the evening, Dr. Hickey got back to all of the patients that had contacted him by phone or email that day, which was impressive. Some other lessons. I thought all the treatments that I was investigating, whether or not the person selling them was a snake oil salesman, would be as bogus as this picture of Bigfoot. And certainly there are several things that we've investigated that are bogus. And if I had to give you some red flags for what these bogus things have in common, some things to watch out for when you're plowing through some new AOTs. First of all, anything that advertises itself as dramatically effective or a cure-all for dozens of diseases that seem to be very different in terms of what causes them is pretty unlikely to work. If somebody really invents something like that, they're not going to hide in a strip mall in India. They will be probably one of the most famous and wealthy people in the history of medicine if they find the cure for ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MS, brain tumors, which some of these folks advertise for. Nothing that is advertised as perfectly safe is that way. There's absolutely nothing in life that is perfectly safe. It's not perfectly safe to get out of bed. It's not perfectly safe to take Tylenol, okay? There's things that can happen to you no matter what it is that you're doing. When you have a non-MD making medical recommendations, that's probably not good. When there's no oversight, when there's no standardization to the protocol, patients are going to a place and they're getting all different kinds of things done. When there's any kind of large out-of-pocket expense, when you're going to a place that wants to sell you something and then never wants to see you back again to measure anything to figure out if it actually worked, those are all red flags. But every once in a while on the X-Files TV show, there was something very strange that happened that Fox Mulder could not explain. One of my favorites was there was this guy that appeared 3 or 4 times over the 10-year history of the show. His name was Squeeze. He was a serial killer. He could squeeze himself down into tiny spaces. And they never did figure out what exactly was going on with that guy. So some of the things that we've investigated as ALS Untangled actually do warrant further scientific investigation because they have plausible mechanisms. There's some preliminary evidence from either animals or people or both that they might work. I'd like to tell you about some of those now. One of them is a stem cell protocol that was invented by a hospital in Mexico called the Hospital San Jose del Tecnológico. These are cells with a specific marker that are taken out of a patient's bloodstream and injected into the front of the patient's brain with a needle. And the idea here is that these would secrete growth factors that might help the upper motor neuron problems that patients with ALS have. It's not a crazy idea. I mean, we think that stem cells might actually be useful in ALS. It's an unusual place to put them. They did a pilot trial, And the trial design was interesting. They said that they took the first 10 patients who showed up in their clinic and gave them the stem cells. And the next 13 would be the controls who didn't get the stem cells. And they compared the survival curves of these two groups and also the ALS functional rating scores over time. So in the upper right-hand corner of the slide, you can see the survival curves. And you can see that the folks who were transplanted, that curve is much flatter than the folks who were not transplanted. That means that the survival in the transplanted group is dramatically better. The other thing that you can see is the bars there in the bottom of the slide, bottom right-hand corner. Those are the ALS FRS scores. So the clear bars are the folks who are the controls. And you can see that over time, that bar gets smaller and smaller. The scores are dropping as they lose function. The gray bars are the folks who got the transplant. And you can see that first there was an improvement in function, and then things came back down to about where it was in the beginning. Well, that's pretty remarkable data. The thing is, there's a huge problem with the study. The problem is that it wasn't a randomized study. And so there could have been some imbalances in the groups just by chance alone. And in fact, if you look at the interval that these patients had ALS, the folks who got transplanted, they had their ALS on average for about 30 months. And the folks who didn't get transplanted had their ALS on average for about 14 months. The longer someone has ALS, by definition, the slower they're progressing. So just by chance alone, these two groups might have been different just because of that variable. The other things that bothered me about this were that they claimed that this treatment was safe and well tolerated. Well, one person died in the first week after the transplant. So a treatment that has a 10% death rate may not be safe and well tolerated. And then finally, the thing is pretty expensive, $18,000 plus your travel costs to get there. Another thing that's interesting, Ames Pro. You may be hearing more about this in the next year because someone just bought this product and is doing more studies. This is hyperimmune goat serum that is injected under the skin. It sounds crazy, but the things that are in here are actually pretty interesting. They're things that modulate the immune system in humans. So there is a published case report that is pretty impressive. This is actually a person who is making their own breathing measurements, tracking them over time, and then they themselves wrote up their case and got it published in the medical journal. And so you can see in the graph what's happening. First, before the person got on Ames Pro, there's a pretty steep slope of decline in breathing. Then they started taking a low dose of Ames Pro, and the curve leveled off a little bit. Then they started taking a slightly higher dose, and the curve leveled off even more. And then finally, at the highest dose, the curve's actually improving. That's very strange for the progression of ALS to look like that. The problem here is that we don't know that this guy can actually accurately measure his own breathing. No one's ever validated that he can do this. And furthermore, he's doing something that we've never done before, which is that he's measuring his own MEP, MIP, SNP, and FVC, which are all things that a pulmonary function test would be composed of. And he's combining all those things into one measurement. We've never done that before. We don't even know if that makes sense. There's no side effects reported by this guy, and it is quite an expensive treatment, 19,000 pounds per year, but it's interesting. Another interesting one was this thing called Lutamax. This is an oral agent. It's a combination of something called flavonoids, which are antioxidants as well as vitamins. The theory makes some sense. I mean, we think that there are oxidative stress markers that are happening in ALS. That's part of the reason why cells are dying. The evidence for this is twofold. First, there's a video, which I won't dare to try to show without locking up the whole system here, but that's the address if anyone wants to quickly write it down. It's a pretty dramatic video. It shows a patient with ALS whose arms are markedly atrophic. And in the video, he's asked to lift up his arms. He says he can't do it. And then someone puts a Lutamax tablet in his mouth, and at the bottom of the screen it says 30 minutes later, and he lifts his arms up over his head, like that. So someone did a small trial of Lutamax, and these are the results of the trial over here. What they're measuring is the ALS functional rating scale. And you can see that the folks on Lutamax that are in red seem to be progressing a little bit more slowly than the folks who are not on Lutamax from the same clinic. Once again, we have a couple of problems with this study. It's not randomized. We don't have a very good description of what these patients look like, so we don't know how imbalanced these groups are. There's also a huge dropout rate. About half the patients who were started on Lutamax dropped out, mainly because of weight loss, which for some reason happens with this. And the thing is, when patients drop out, you have to do something which is called an intention to treat analysis. You can't just keep studying the folks who are doing well. The reason is that you would never be able to replicate that situation in the real world. So this data probably looks better than it should. This would never be accepted by a journal or by the FDA. Over the course of the video, good news is feeding him large amounts of coconut oil, and he seems to be getting better. And one of the most interesting parts of the video to me was this draw a clock test, which is something that we do to follow patients with Alzheimer's disease. You can see one day before coconut oil, when he's asked to do this, he draws something that looks absolutely nothing like a clock. 2 weeks after starting coconut oil, he draws something that looks pretty good. And a little over a month after starting coconut oil, he draws a pretty normal clock. So why might coconut oil work for ALS? Well, coconut oil is comprised of something called medium-chain triglycerides. When people take those, they're converted in the body over to something called ketone bodies. Ketone bodies can be used by cells as a source of energy. So one of the most popular theories of why people with ALS keep getting worse is that there's a problem with energy production because there's a problem with the power plants in their cells, which are called mitochondria. So it's an interesting idea to give cells a different source of energy, something that might compensate for the energy production problem due to mitochondrial disease. The other reason this might work is because for reasons we still don't fully understand, there seems to be a relationship between your lipid or cholesterol status and the progression of your ALS. And the relationship is kind of interesting. Turns out that patients who have the worst lipid profiles actually seem to progress the slowest with their ALS. And we don't know why that is. But one thing that coconut oil will do is raise your cholesterol. So there's no animal studies of coconut oil, but there are 2 studies in animals that are relevant. There is a study of something called the ketogenic diet, in which animals were fed this special diet that would raise the levels of ketone bodies in their blood, and those animals did better than controls. And there's a study of a high-fat diet in animals to raise up their cholesterol, and those animals progress more slowly. There are no human trials of coconut oil in ALS. We have not been able to find any patients from any of our clinics. None of the ALS Untangled investigators have patients who are using coconut oil in any sort of systematic way. But there are 6 case reports on the internet, 5 from patients like me. 2 out of 6 are reporting things that are very interesting. Both of them are reporting believable improvements in their strength. So for example, one patient said, before I started coconut oil, my hands were so weak that I could not button my shirts by myself. And now a few months after starting coconut oil, I can button my shirts by myself. That's actually pretty believable. Seems to be pretty safe. The main side effect of coconut oil is diarrhea. And as many of you probably know, that might not be so bad for patients with ALS because a lot of them have constipation. So if nothing else, coconut oil might actually help patients with ALS who have constipation. And then finally, the other reason I like this is it's the cheapest by far of anything we've studied, somewhere on the order of $25 a month. So we've learned some interesting things, but we are still struggling with a few challenges. The biggest challenge that we have is there's a widening gap between the number of open and completed investigations that we have. And the reason for that is a good one. There's a lot of people interested in this. We're getting a lot more Twitter followers. We're getting a lot more questions. Some of the topics that we're asked to investigate, we just cannot find any information. The person who's selling that thing is not responding to us. There's absolutely nothing on the internet about it. We have no patients that are going there. We have a little bit of difficulty finding people in the ALS community who want to step forward and lead one of these investigations. It actually is a lot of work to put one of these things together, to put the draft together. And then finally, we've struggled because the ALS Journal only comes out 4 or 5 times a year. So that has been limiting us. Another challenge is that there seems to be limited opportunities for comments or rebuttals from people who don't agree with what we said in our investigations. Now, the reality is that anybody can write a letter to the ALS Journal, a letter to the editor, if they don't agree with anything that's published in there, and the editor of the journal will probably help you revise it so that it's not inflammatory, but it will get published. But still, people are sometimes intimidated to do things like that. They want an easier place to put their rebuttals. It's difficult to measure the usefulness of something like ALS Untangled. And maybe most frustrating of all, we don't have any resources for studying some of the things we found that are interesting. I'll tell you how we're dealing with some of these challenges. To deal with the problem of authorship, we've got a small amount of grant money now that we can offer to young investigators who want to do one of these and present it at a meeting, so we can actually help pay their meeting expenses. And that's allowed us to get 3 new authors in the past month. The ALS Journal has a new way that you can publish things. It's called early online, so we don't have to wait for the paper version of the journal to come out. We can actually publish it early online on their website. We've expanded our own website to allow folks to post comments or rebuttals right on the main page of our website with no filter. This makes me nervous, but we decided to go for it. So what we're doing is it's a live Twitter feed right on the main page of our website. So if one of you wanted to go home and say, I think ALS Untangled stinks and your hair looks ridiculous, it would appear on the main page of my website in 5 minutes. There's nothing I can do about it, okay? Another thing that I'm pretty excited about that we started doing about a month ago is we realized that we probably don't have any way of working through this whole list of 64 things, and more things keep coming in. So we're allowing all of you to vote for the reviews that you most want to see. And so you can see what's happened over the past month. One has risen to the top, which is the Deanna Protocol, for which we have 175 requests. In terms of measuring usefulness, the only thing I can think of is to measure whether people are actually looking at our articles. And the journal, every year, at the end of the year, publishes a list of what the top 10 or 20 most downloaded articles for the year are. So this is the list from 2012. These are the top 12 most downloaded articles. And you can see that 11 of the 12 most downloaded articles were ALS Untangled reviews. Now, I should say, just in the interest of full disclosure, ours are the only free ones, so that probably helps. So, just a few conclusions about this part of the talk. I hope I've convinced you that it is very important for all of us in this field to investigate these AOTs. The truth about them is out there, but it's not always easy for any of us to find. ALS Untangled is one way, a systematic way for us to get information together about these things. We've learned some surprising lessons. We've got some challenges, but we're working through those, and we feel like people are at least reading our articles. I want to tell you where this program fits in terms of the broad goals of my work. Anyone who works in this field has one goal, which is to cure ALS. Now, there are some specific reasons why we don't have a cure for ALS. First, we don't know what causes most cases of ALS. Second, we don't understand why once people get it, they keep getting worse. Third, it takes a long time to make a diagnosis, on average over a year, from the time someone has their first symptoms to the time that we can make a diagnosis. Fourth, the things we use to measure ALS, to determine if people are getting better or worse, they're noisy and they take a long time to change. That means that our trials have to be comprised of large numbers and go on for a long time. Fifth, this is a pretty rare disease, and we have limited resources for studying it. And then finally, there's this problem of enrollment. And that's the one that I've decided to try to focus on in my career. And I'm working with a lot of talented groups, the ALSRG, the Northeast ALS Consortium, the Western ALS Consortium, and the Packard Center at Hopkins. So what are we doing about this? Well, first of all, we're trying to raise awareness of research options. We want to make sure that no physician who works in ALS or patient who has ALS has a problem finding out what their research options are. We know that clinicaltrials.gov is one website that you can use to find out what your research options are, but we also know that it's not the most user-friendly website. So we've created one that we think is more user-friendly. The address is www.alsconsortium.org/search. And we've gone a step further, and we've created a clinical trial concierge service, which is on the Northeast ALS Consortium website. So if you're not a web person, the clinical trials concierge is standing by at a phone with an email address. All you have to do is email them, tell them where you are, tell them a little bit about your ALS, and they will help you try to find a clinical research study you can participate in. We're trying to do all we can to raise awareness by writing in patient-centric literature, by coming to groups like this to speak to them. And I would be remiss if I did not actually tell you while I was here about some of the exciting things that are happening in ALS research that you might be able to get involved in now or in the near future. So this is what our pipeline looks like. In the center here is the motor neuron. The little green cell in the upper right-hand corner is called an astrocyte. The cell at the bottom is, it looks like a rectangle, is the muscle. And then I've added something to this picture, which is the most primitive of all the shapes on here. It's this one right here. Pretty obvious which one I added. That's called the microglia or macrophage. So let's look at some of the things that we're doing to these different cells. So we'll focus first on the motor neuron. We've got something that's in production, which is called an antisense oligonucleotide. It's from a company called ISIS Pharmaceuticals. The point of this is actually to try to block the production of a protein in ALS that might actually be one of the reasons why once people get this, they keep getting worse. So the main one they're working with is the SOD1 protein, but they're looking at other proteins too, including C9orf72. In recent years, one of the things we've learned is that it appears that one of the things going wrong in ALS is that proteins become misfolded or tangled, and they acquire a very interesting property, which is called a prion-like property. What that means is when those misfolded or tangled proteins bump into another normal protein that lives next door, they actually can mess up that protein and cause it to become misfolded and tangled. And this may be why the disease seems to start very focally and to spread out from that place in the nervous system. If you can imagine a misfolded protein acting like a domino to start knocking down other proteins and just having that spread across the nervous system. So this may be a way to attack that. We're working to try to get rid of some of those clumps of protein in a different way, and that is with something called arimoclomol. What that does is it actually upregulates a group of proteins in the neuron called heat shock proteins. And those can grab other broken proteins and shuttle them out of the cell, arimoclomol. We have been working on trying to improve the problem with the power plants or mitochondria in the cell. And so you probably heard about dexpramipexole and olisoxine, which were two things that we were studying last year to try to improve the energy production problem. Unfortunately, the main analysis of both of those, which came out in December, suggests that they probably don't work. That's why I've got a big X through those on my slide here. Now, I almost changed this from an X to a question mark, and the reason is that the Biogen analysis of the dexpramipexole study suggested that that drug did not work. There is another company involved in the development of dexpramipexole, which is called Canop, and they have recently reported that they think they have found a signal in the data that suggests that the drug might actually work for some patients with ALS, and we're looking forward to hearing more about that when they're ready to publicly reveal that. Up in the upper right-hand corner, we've got that green cell, which is the astrocyte. We know that cell's got some problems. One of the problems it has, it's got a protein in its membrane that allows that cell to suck up toxic chemicals, one of which is glutamate. And we've been trying to figure out how to make that protein work better. Last year, we tried a drug called ceftriaxone. It worked good in animals. It doesn't work in people. So that's kind of a dead end right now. Down in the lower left-hand corner, we've got that funny-looking blue cell that I drew, microglia or macrophage. That's one of the most exciting cells that we're working with right now in ALS. So when that cell gets turned on, it becomes like a tiny Pac-Man, and it tries to gobble up anything that's in its nearby vicinity. Now, normally, it's supposed to be gobbling up viruses and bacteria, but in ALS, it seems to be gobbling up motor neurons. And so there's two drugs that are in development to deal with that cell. One is called MP001, and you may have heard about the exciting results of that. In our phase 2 safety study that was presented in December, we found not only is that drug safe and well tolerated, but also about 30% of patients with ALS who were on that drug had no progression in their illness for 6 months. So that's incredible. We've never seen anything like that before. And now the company is trying to figure out what's different about that 30% compared to the rest of the patients who didn't seem to have any benefit. There's also another drug that's going to be coming into studies very soon. It's called Gilenya, also known as fingolimod, and that's actually acting on that cell as well. Going down to the bottom part of this figure, out of the cell body of the motor neuron, there's a long process, or axon. that long processor axon has lots of channels in it that allow it to conduct electricity. There's some evidence that some of those channels are not working properly, and as a result that axon is overexcited, causing too much calcium to come in, which causes the axon to start to break down. There is about to be a trial of a drug called mexiletine, which acts on those channels. Getting all the way down to the bottom, we're looking to see if we can do anything with muscle. Now, why would we go after muscle? Well, it's probably not going to be a way to cure ALS. Obviously, this is not a muscle disease. But if we could make muscle work a little better, we might be able to give patients with ALS a little more strength and function, at least for a while, until the muscle becomes completely denervated. And so Paul mentioned earlier a drug called CK2017357. That's the drug from Cytokinetics. Now, thankfully, they renamed that drug recently. The new name of it is Terasmative. I'm not sure which name's worse, to be honest with you, but at least we have a different name for it. Preliminary studies of that drug do suggest that in some muscles, patients with ALS are getting more strength, and also on one measure of breathing, which is called MVV, patients are doing a little bit better. And so we're hoping that we can actually firm that up and show that this drug is safe, tolerable, and effective. That drug is now in a phase 3 study. There's some other things we're doing with muscle which are more early in development. One of them is from a company called GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. It's actually an inhibitor of something called no-go. No-go is a protein that for some reason is secreted by muscle, which tells an axon that is trying to grow back and reconnect with the muscle, we don't want you here. So Glaxo is finding a way to block that protein so the axon has a better chance of reconnecting. And then finally, there's some stem cell work going on that's incredibly exciting. It's also very, very preliminary. So most of you know about the neural stem studies going on at Emory, where we're injecting fetal stem cells directly into the spinal cord of patients with ALS. The first 18 patients who've had that done appear to be doing well. It seems like the procedure was very well tolerated, which is great. In fact, one patient actually seems to be getting stronger. And that study's going into a new phase, which is going to start in Mexico, actually, later this year. And then there's another company called Brainstorm Cell, which is out of Israel. And their idea is to take your own stem cells from your bone marrow and inject them into your spinal fluid. And they've done a small pilot trial in Israel showing that it seems to be safe and well tolerated. And they're trying to get a trial up and running here in the US this year. So in addition to folks like Paul and I running around and talking about this, we're actually trying to train patients and caregivers to be more effective research advocates. And so we've created a program to do this. It's called the Clinical Research Learning Institute. It's modeled after programs that were started in Parkinson's and cancer. And what we do is we ask patients and family members to apply and tell us why you would be a good research ambassador. And unfortunately, we can only take, for each one of these that we do, 20 patient-caregiver pairs. So we can't take everybody. But if we select you, we will pay for you to come to wherever we are for that particular one. Usually we do this in Florida. And to spend a weekend with us, hearing some very detailed, intense lectures on the history of research, so that you have the tools to deal with some of these misconceptions patients have. Things like being a guinea pig. You can explain to them why that's no longer possible. We'll also give you some quick tips on advocacy, meaning tips on public speaking, using PowerPoint, using the internet, using websites like Patients Like Me, writing a blog, writing letters to Congress, and how to do an interview. There's a lot of discussion and debate, and I think that not only are we able to teach some things, but I think I can safely say that all of us on the faculty learn a lot when you come there and spend a weekend with us and tell us about some of the frustrations you're having. We try to track the results of our research ambassadors, and so we again just put this up a couple months ago. But these are some of the things that they're out there doing. They're writing on websites, they're talking to Congress, they're writing in newspapers, and they're speaking at support groups. And finally, my colleagues and I are trying to make research as easy as possible for you. We're trying to build more clinics because we know some of you live far away from clinics. We're trying to expand the number of clinics that do research. There's the Northeast ALS Consortium, over 100 clinics in North America that do research. And we're trying to design studies that are easier for you to participate in because we make measurements in your own home. So some of the new studies are doing that. We're even developing telemedicine programs where we can talk to you, take care of you, maybe even study you in a research study through your own home computer with us in our office, and you wouldn't have to travel as often to the clinic. So let's get back to this patient for a second and talk about one way that this could go, a shared decision-making model by which we might influence what Samantha does. She asks us about this. We say we understand that this is a very intriguing video. We've got an ALS Untangled investigation on this, the ANA protocol, which we haven't published yet. It'll be published in about 2 weeks. The purpose of it is to field statements from patients, clinicians, anybody who wants to call or email about a potential side effect from a drug that was not reported in the labeling of the drug. And so as a result of this, sometimes the labeling of drugs gets changed years after they come out. And so in that database, there seem to be more reports of people claiming that they thought that their ALS had been triggered by a statin than one might expect. And so that led to this idea that maybe statins could be a trigger for ALS. Well, so far, no other study has been able to support that. So people have looked at the frequency of statin use in folks with ALS compared to the frequency in large databases of age and sex and comorbidity matched patients without ALS. And there doesn't seem to be a big difference. You would think that if statins were a trigger for ALS, that in the past 20 years, as statin use has exploded, the frequency of ALS would also have exploded, and that there's no evidence that that's happened. So I think it's safe to say 2 things. First, I don't think that statins are a major cause of ALS. But second, one of the things that we've all learned in this field is that there probably is no overwhelming major environmental cause for ALS. There's probably a lot of small things that are patient-specific. So could statins be a trigger for ALS in some people? I think the answer is yes. But it's going to be very, very difficult to prove that. Yeah.
I might add too with statins, sometimes we see patients, as I'm sure Rick has, who develop a myopathy, quote unquote, and of course statins can trigger that, but they also may unmask a coexisting disease that was there to begin with, and it's a coincidental or serendipitous finding. So that's where it gets to be a very tricky, is it consequence or subsequence? Anyone else? No hands going up, my goodness. Oh, we have one over here. Hold on, we've got a microphone en route.
You had mentioned the stem cells, and there's one that's just getting ready to start up through Mayo Clinic that I was doing some research on. Anything on that?
Are you talking about the brainstorm cell study at the Mayo Clinic? Is that the one you're talking about?
One where they take fat out of your stomach, turn it into stem cells, reinject into the spinal column?
I don't know as much about that particular one because it's just that one site. So I would encourage you to contact that site to find out a little bit more about that particular one. But at this time, I don't know as much about that one because it's just a small one that's being done at one site.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, as I've told many of you with research protocols, especially when it's limited sites, they're not necessarily going to share much. Not that they wouldn't, but and sometimes they are proprietary, so it gets to be difficult. But certainly anyone wishing to be enrolled, as Rick mentioned earlier, with the safeguards and research, it's not just here I am and I'm blindly going to follow you. There has to be full disclosure to the patient, subject as a potential enrollee. We got a hand up over there. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll get to you next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question on the NP001. I wrote down that you said 30% showed no progression. I believe it's still in phase 3 trial, if I remember correctly. Is that going to be available for ALS patients to take in the near future, or what is the status of that at this time?
So the trial that was done would have been classified as a phase 2A study, which means it was a small study, which was mostly designed to look at the safety of this. Again, because some of the things that we're trying to do in our ALS research have never been done before in the history of medicine. like no one has ever shut down the ability of that part of your immune system, macrophages, to be turned on. We didn't know if people would suddenly start dying from infections when we did that, so we have to kind of ease into this, as frustrating as that is. So that was a fairly small study that was mostly designed to look at safety and tolerability. So it's even more impressive that out of that study, there was actually an effect, an effectiveness signal. Usually in those small studies, we don't even hope to see that. But the idea is that that needs to be replicated in a large study that's designed specifically to look at that effect. And my understanding is that the company, Neuraltis, who owns that drug, is looking for a partner. Those big phase 3 studies are very expensive. They typically cost double-digit millions of dollars to do. They're usually more than a small company can do on their own. That's why the only reason why dexpramipexole finally got into a phase 3 study was because Biogen, huge resource-rich company, was able to partner with the small company Canam that was developing it. So they were able to get that study off the ground worldwide. Typical phase 3 study is 1,000 patients at about 100 centers around the world. So that's the kind of thing we're probably going to be looking at with NP001. And I know they're looking for a partner. I have not heard if there's any kind of negotiation going on. But I think that we're going to need that study before we know for sure that it works. And then the question of, is it available for patients? Well, right now it's not. So one of the more recent ALS Untangled reviews that we did is called oral sodium chloride. So the active ingredient in NP001 is sodium chloride. And there's a community of patients online that wanted to be in the NP001 study but couldn't for one reason or another. Either they lived by a site or the disease was too early or too far progressed to be in. And so they got together and came up with a protocol for taking sodium chloride orally. You can buy sodium chloride to be taken orally. It's actually a bleaching agent. And so there were some preliminary suggestions that some patients were feeling better. Again, there wasn't a lot of overlap between them, which makes us nervous. When we looked at the Patients Like Me data, we actually were able to do a special analysis because there were so many people on Patients Like Me doing it that we'd never been able to do before, which was a case control study. So we could create a matched historical control group. And it turned out that the patients using sodium chloride on Patients Like Me were progressing faster than we would have expected, looking at the historical controls. And then the final problem with oral sodium chloride is that we went back and looked at some of the environmental health literature. So decades ago, people were doing studies to see what happened when human beings ingested oral sodium chloride as a water purification agent. Well, that is rapidly hydrolyzed by the saliva, by acid, to become something called chlorine dioxide. So first of all, it's unlikely that sodium chloride survives the mouth, much less the stomach, and can be absorbed at levels that would influence macrophages. Second of all, chlorine dioxide is a poisonous gas. So not only is this not really plausible that you could take this orally and that it could help, but it also might be dangerous. And so we don't recommend that people take that orally. And I know there's some groups that are planning to try to work with Neuraltis to be able to get compassionate use of NP001. There's a group called the ALS Emergency Treatment Fund that I know is planning to do that. And I don't know how that's going to go. I would support that if it was possible. But what folks have to realize is that when it's a small company, they just might not have the financial resources to produce enough of that drug. I mean, imagine if tomorrow suddenly 10,000 ALS patients want NP001. The company would be they would have no possible way of making that much of that drug. So it remains to be seen, but I do know that that drug will be further developed. It's very exciting.
We had another question over there. Okay.
Yes. You mentioned the inverse correlation of the lipid profile and progression.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, especially for people who are having a slow progression, how do you weigh the cardiovascular risks that are known against the questionable or possible benefits for progression of a high poor lipid profile?
It's a wonderful question, and the answer is no one knows. I'll tell you what I do. So if I have somebody whose ALS is rapidly progressing, then in my mind, the potential risks of aggressive management of their lipids outweigh the potential benefits. what are we trying to do by aggressively managing lipids? We're trying to prevent heart attacks and strokes over many years. Someone who's rapidly progressing from ALS, unfortunately, may not have many years to worry about heart attacks and strokes. So I want to try to throw everything I can onto the fire to slow that down, anything where there's any sort of rationale. But on the other hand, someone with very slowly progressive ALS who may live 5 or 10 years or even longer, there I think the benefits probably outweigh the risks. So I think that they should have the same management of their lipid profile that anyone else would have. You have to understand that this whole area is a little bit sketchy right now. Now, if the high-fat diet shows that we can dramatically slow ALS progression by by taking somebody with normal lipids and raising their lipids up, that's going to change a lot of things, including the answer to your question. But for right now, for me, how I manage that depends upon how they're progressing. If they're very fast, I take off the statins. If they're very slow, then I want their PCP to aggressively manage all their medical problems, including their hyperlipidemia. We'll see what Paul says.
And including leaving them on statins?
Yeah. Yep. There's a clear survival rate for people on statins. There's no question that they reduce the risk of heart attacks and strokes, just in general. There's no question about it. So for someone who's slowly progressing with their ALS, who may live a long time, I've got some patients that have had ALS for 20 or 30 years. Well, clearly I don't want them to have a heart attack or stroke. I mean, their ALS is not a huge problem for them. It's not going to limit the length of their life, most likely, these folks. So why would I want to open up the risk of them having a heart attack or stroke by not managing that appropriately? On the other hand, someone who's got a year or two to survive, I'm not as worried about what's going to happen from a heart attack or stroke standpoint 5 years from now.
Yeah, I would agree. We try to do this on an individual basis, so it depends. Sometimes also patients are given statin agents rather blithely because it's the right thing to do. And if their lipid panel is not all that bad, we may just say ask the primary care provider to maybe look for an alternate way besides a statin, or maybe have another look at the diet, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is a big gray zone here. That, or I guess we'll be looking to start the Wisconsin custard protocol and see if we can increase survival rate. I did have a patient whose husband dutifully brought home a hot fudge sundae every night, so, but not because of that. We have maybe one more, okay, sorry.
Yeah, do they have any research up there about advanced ALS?
About research about advanced ALS?
Yeah.
What do you mean by research? You mean opportunities to participate in research studies?
Yeah.
There is an opportunity for folks with advanced ALS to participate in research studies. So those folks are most likely to be able to participate in studies to understand ALS better. So for example, there's a study that's open at many sites across the country, sponsored by Biogen, looking at genes. And the study really just involves getting a blood test and taking some questionnaires about your family history. And the purpose of the study is to try to identify genes that might cause ALS that we don't already have, but also more importantly to identify genes that explain why people progress so differently with their ALS. In my mind, that's one of the most important things that we're trying to understand right now. I'm just struck by how different people are with ALS. I think Mother Nature is trying to give us an important clue about how we slow ALS down in everybody. We just have to try to figure out what the clue is, and I think it's in the genes.
As is traditional too, we do have a token of our appreciation. So since we're on a roll on fats and cholesterol, and he can't take beer back on the plane, we do have some tucked away here artfully, some great northern chocolate from our friend downtown, the Irascible Jim, on Martin Luther King Drive. So he is a first-rate chocolatier, and he even makes heart-healthy chocolate. He's a bit irascible. He is sort of the chocolate Nazi. You can't walk in wearing fur, and you have to wipe your feet carefully, and when you leave, he advises you to make sure you brush and floss. And then, because Dr. Bedlack is the essence of sartorial splendor, we wanted to make sure he had a proper, for these formal occasions, he might have to go. And as a gesture of respect to me, it has to have a bow tie to go with it. I just hope you don't get attacked by mice down there. And now you're ready for a Packer game. Carrie is mad as a hatter to a new level there. All right, I guess Lori will announce the next. I think luncheon is on the table shortly, or on the agenda rather.
Well, I think that's just perfect. I think it goes with his outfit today. Well, I just want to say my own thank you, Dr. Bedlack. I think that was really, really so interesting, and I appreciate your work with ALS Untangled because it's just an invaluable resource for all of us. So thank you for being here today. We hope that you'll accept an invitation to return real soon. And now, we're going to be breaking for lunch, and the program will be resuming at 12:30. Lunch is going to be served at your tables, but just before, please don't forget to sign the letters. If you could, we'll be collecting those before lunch is served so that they'll be safe. And take some time to visit with the exhibitors after you've eaten, and also the National ALS Registry table, if you can stop by there. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch, or if you're still eating, just take your time and enjoy. We are going to be starting the afternoon program a little differently than is on the schedule. We're going to start out with a brief presentation by Diane Fergut, who is our Care Services Coordinator in the Fox Valley. And the ALS, she's going to be talking about a program that the ALS Association has developed to provide guidance in developing a supportive caregiving team. And it's called the Care Connection. And Diane is actually, she's stepped forward to really take the lead in the development of the program for the chapter, and she's going to be sharing some more information with us today.
Good afternoon. So I have a couple of questions for you. Are you or your caregiver feeling completely overwhelmed, either with things that are happening today or things that you're facing in the future? Have you had people in your world, in your family, in your network of friends who have offered to help, and you just don't even know what to do with that offer because you're just feeling so, again, overwhelmed with the needs and the realities that you're facing every day? This is where Care Connection steps in. Almost 20 years ago, actually in 1995, a couple of women who had worked with a dear friend who had been diagnosed with cancer put together a program or a concept called Share the Care. Some of you may have heard of this program. This was actually, the book was published in 1995. And a lot of, because of the nature of the program and how well it fit with ALS and the progressive needs that come into the picture in dealing with ALS, a lot of the chapters throughout the country of the ALS Association actually incorporated a Share the Care model in working with the families that they dealt with. What they decided was that because of the very unique nature of ALS and its progression and the changing needs in the landscape, several chapters actually came together and put together the Care Connection, which essentially is the ALS Association's version of Share the Care. And basically what it does is, ideally, someone outside of the immediate family and the immediate caregiver steps up and says, how can I help? That person then really collaborates and coordinates all of those folks that have expressed an interest in helping, gets information from them, coordinates with them to create this network so that people can get the help that they need. Rather than having to reach out and ask for it, basically the care comes to them. And again, it shares the care among a lot of people rather than one or two people being so overwhelmed with the day-to-day needs. The ALS Association put together all kinds of resources and support to help people in setting up these care connections. There's actually a website called Lots of Helping Hands that was developed by a fellow whose wife had cancer, and basically allows for all of the tasks that need to be accomplished to be placed on a schedule, on a calendar, and then the people who are as part of the care team can simply sign up for things that they'd like to help with. We really encourage you, this is new for us, we're very excited to make this available, and we just encourage you, if you have any kind of an interest in maybe seeing if this might work for your family, to just lighten the load and share the care, to please let myself or one of the other care services team members know of your interest, and we will make sure and get you the information that you need. And actually, I believe Peggy Greason is going to be talking about using Share the Care in her experiences, and I think is a real good testimony to how this can work. So thank you very much, and again, good luck with creating your care connections.
Thanks, Diane. Such great information for everybody to think about. I don't know if everybody knows me here. I think you guys all do, but I'm Carolyn. I'm a social worker and care services coordinator at the ALS Association. So, as most of you are aware, there are two different forms of ALS, sporadic and familial. Approximately 90 to 95% of ALS is sporadic, meaning it occurs without a family history. The parts of the body that are affected by ALS are the voluntary muscles, including the diaphragm and accessory muscles necessary for breathing, as well as the upper and lower extremities. Today, I have the honor of introducing Ken Daly, a gentleman from Beloit who was diagnosed with sporadic ALS a few years ago. Ken is here along with his wife, Shirley, his daughter, Tricia, and Tricia's husband, Terry, his son, Chad, and Chad's wife, Tracy, and they're going to share their journey of living with ALS. Let's give a warm welcome to the Daly family.
Thank you. Bear with me because it's been a long time since I've done this. Good afternoon. My name is Ken Daly and I have ALS. I'm here today to find out more about ALS. I was born September 30th, 1953 to Richard and Marjorie Daly. I come from a family of 12, 6 brothers, 6 sisters, and I'm in the middle of the family. I was born and raised a Catholic, attending a Catholic school, and graduated from Beloit Catholic High School in 1972. Upon graduating, 2 days after high school, I married my wife, Shirley. My father passed away in March of 1974 from cancer at the age of 55. I forgot to mention that the wife and me have been married for 41 years, which is an accomplishment nowadays. I lost a brother when I was a year and a half old from spinal meningitis. I lost a sister 10 years ago from breast cancer. My mother passed away about 5 years. I worked for 28 years at the Beloit Corporation until the year 2000 when the company went bankrupt. I worked a year after that with the company that bought it out to take care of the finishing touches. I was then brought into a job through corporate contractors as a lay person and into the carpenter trade. I worked there for 5 years and was then moved to the mother company, ABC headquarters in maintenance, and worked there until February of this year. I've always been a hands-on person. Doing all the work around the house. We had a 2.5 car garage, and I built a 2-car garage on the front of my existing garage in the event of having for a workshop at retirement. In that, I had also replaced the windows in my house and roofed, sided, and installed a furnace, central air, as many other small projects. In the fall 2007, we purchased a small business named the National Flag Store. We sold flags, poles, and installing and repairing poles. Upon learning of my disease, my strength getting weaker, we were forced to sell our business in the fall of 2011. Throughout our life, our Christian background has always been a part of our marriage. I started having symptoms in the summer of 2010 with leg cramps and arm cramps and twitching in the arms. I thought it was a side effect from one of the changes in the medication that the doctor had given me. But the doctor sent me to a neurologist, Dr. Marino at the Boyd Clinic. He did several tests and wanted a second opinion and sent me to Dr. Lotz in Madison. Upon further testing, confirmation was made that I did have ALS. We then pursued the Mayo Clinic to get another opinion. They in turn did even more tests and were not convinced that it was ALS. They called it anterior horn cell disease, which is actually the beginning of ALS. As time went on, I could feel the strength in my arms and hands deteriorating, and it was hard to do ordinary tasks. It was in the fall of 2011 that Mayo Clinic diagnosed me with ALS. January of last year, we attended the ALS support group here in Milwaukee and found the group very informative, so we came back. Next month, Dr. Barkholz talked, and I was impressed and decided that Milwaukee was much closer than the Mayo Clinic and switched doctors. While I was at the Mayo Clinic, I was approached about a stem cell study project, and they thought that I might be a good candidate. This is very exciting to think that maybe there would be some hope, but my hopes were crushed because they said I had more than 2 years, and I was over the time by about 1 or 2 months. My wife, we had talked about selling the house and moving to a condo because she didn't think we could handle the upkeep. Our children said that there was enough family and not to worry about it. So after the discussion, I convinced her to stay in the house. Last summer, we decided to prepare ourselves for the future. Thus, we started remodeling our bath and entryway to make it handicap accessible. And that we learned from this show last year, is to prepare yourself for the future. Since then, we've got a walk-in shower, and we've had access into our house for handicap accessibility. Now the frustration is everyday activities such as eating, writing, showering, and even getting up from sitting position. This illness has been the illness is a very humbling experience. In the past, I never had to depend on anyone else. I was always able to help others. now I have to swallow. I had to swallow my pride and accept all others. For now, I take each day as it comes. I'm grateful that I have another day, and I'm thankful for what I do have, and I have had all the years. God has been good to me, and I know He's always there, no matter what. My wife went to work to help us out financially, but once I was on disability, we made the decision to have her stay home with me because it was our best alternative, because she could take care of me better than anyone else. Because the time is worth more than the money. We used to spend our time on vacations doing things like biking, camping, and walking the beaches. We have now planned a vacation while I still have the ability to walk on my own. Quality of life means different things to different people, but here are a few things that it means to me. Being able to help others, laughing with life, as well as at life. Being able to wake up every day and knowing I have another day to enjoy. Spending time with my wife and family. Striving to learn my real purpose in life so I can have true quality. When I see a child with a severe illness, such as cancer, it reminds me of the life that I've been given. As long as I can breathe on my own and contribute to life, I will have some quality of life. Every day, I remind myself how fortunate I am that God has given me my family, my friends, and the ALS Association to deal with this disease. Each day, we are reminded that God doesn't give us more than we can handle, but He helps us with what we do have. Terry, you want to come up?
I was going to talk a little off topic. We just did a benefit in Beloit. We're going to turn it into an annual benefit. It's all for ALS. The benefit's kind of based around music. And, you know, music's always kind of a thing that brings people together. And we've decided to name it Banding Together. We just did our first benefit on March 9th. Ended up raising $17,000 for the Wisconsin chapter. It was a fun time too. Everybody just absolutely came out of the woodwork. It was amazing how basically organizations, people just help. I mean, people are just utterly amazing. The benefit's going to continue on. We learned a whole lot doing it once, so the second time we're going to aim for doubling those numbers. And we had Carolyn, and we had Melanie, and Susan. Yeah, and we had everybody's help from the Wisconsin chapter, and then I think was it last Friday? Yeah, last Friday, we had him in Beloit, drug him down there, and handed a check over. Turned out pretty good. Yeah.
I'm Chad, I'm Fed's son. I just want to add a couple things. I know you were talking about the flag store, and just to give you a couple things and ideas, he talked about doing things. Well, there's a good picture there. He wasn't so much a, hey, here's how you do it. He was more, get out of my way, I'll do it. So I kind of had to watch by learning, which I told him when we were kind of talking about that. I said, good, that means that I can start doing some of this stuff and you can kind of start watching. Because we had talked about that when he found out we were actually on a site putting a flagpole in. And one of the things that I had mentioned to my dad is the fact that you're going to have to let others help you. He's been so self-sufficient. I think part of that is what we learn in society as we push that self-sufficiency. But he's helping me relearn to kind of, everybody needs some help. Everybody has different things. And everybody has a way to give or be part of the process. But, for me, for the others, sometimes the help is part of the healing process or being involved in helping that person too. One of the things we got to do, we went to a Packer game last year, which we had talked about for a long time and never got a chance to do. A couple days ago, we ended up going to the brewery and drug my mom along too, which I thought she'd never go to a ball game. And one of the things that he kind of mentioned too, that there's a song that's called Good Morning Again, and in the lyrics it says, I just wanted to say good morning again. So that kind of what you said, it's important to appreciate every day that you have. So as this goes along, it's been a learning process. So but we have a really kind of tight family, so that's helping as well. So thank you.
Thank you to the Daly family for that very touching journey that they're on. My name is Carolyn Young. I'm Carolyn number 2. Up in Green Bay. I'm a care service coordinator up in the North Central area, Green Bay and Northward. One of the, and Carolyn number 1 alluded to the fact that 90 to 95% of ALS is sporadic and it touches lives unexpectedly. One of the things that I fear most when I do a home visit to newly diagnosed families is when the question is asked, can I get this? Is it inherited? And I watch the faces of the people present when I have to explain to them that 5 to 10% of people will get ALS. They will inherit it. It's called familial ALS. And we don't know which 5 to 10% that's going to be unless another person in the family presents with it. And that can cause a great deal of uncertainty. And any time there is a physical change in another person in the family, they can't open a jar, whatever the change might be, it rattles them and it changes their life forever. Most of the cases are caused by mutations in one of several genes and are dominantly inherited, and that was Art Weber. And the group of people sitting to my left are of the Art Weber family. Jim Weber, Cynthia Skada, Peggy Dreesen, and Nancy Kettner are all part of that incredible family. And their stories are very compelling. And now I introduce this family to you. Jim?
So you think we're from Canadians?
Who you got?
How's everybody doing today? Good. My name's Jim Weber. I'm 52 years young. I'm married to my wife Kathy for 30 years. We have 3 children. My oldest, Jason, lives in Pulaski, Wisconsin, with his 2 daughters, Leanna and Peyton. Amanda, who is currently pregnant with a little boy. And then our daughter, Jessica, who lives in Appleton with her fiance, Cody. They have a little boy named Cohen, who's at our house quite a bit. We babysit for him a lot. But I'm the most recent of the Weber family that's diagnosed with ALS. But before I get into my story, I wanted to talk a little bit about my dad, who was diagnosed in 1998 with ALS. He was a dandy. He loved playing practical jokes on the kids and the grandkids. And I remember one time he was telling all the grandkids that there is a bear in the backyard. Our daughter Jessica, who was 5 at the time, turned around and sort of questioned him and said, "Okay, I'm going to run around the front of the house to see this bear." And Dad took off out the back door, sort of snickering as he went out the door, and hid behind the bush. And as Jessie came around the corner, started growling at her, and she turned around, turned tail, and ran back to the front of the house crying. Came back in the front door and she goes, "There really is a bear out there." But, you know, it's the crazy things like that, I guess, we learned about. You know, she still talks about as far as that Dad's up in heaven keeping things lively up there with the angels, drinking old fashions. Because he always liked his brown ones. But he also shared his love for fishing with everybody. There's very few times that I can remember my dad ever going out fishing or leaving the dock without a full boat of people and poles. He loved to pass on his passion for fishing with the family and the friends. My mom, who's a tower of strength, tried to manage Dad's caregiving. She is still a ball fighter today, who can run circles around those people. As Dad became more handicapped, it was very obvious that she couldn't do it all. Dad would sleep in short spurts and needed constant attention, and Dad and Mom, you know, really the troops. There's 9 of us kids and our spouses, and they always call us the 9 mistakes, because none of us were planned. So we all took turns giving care to my dad. And Mom and them came up with a plan. They said, "You know something, for the ones that live further away, they'll take the weekend shifts. For us that live locally, we would help out during the week." And we all worked, you know, according to what schedules we had, and helped out where we could with Mom and Dad. And then but our family together was always a true force, helping everybody. But even more important than that was a special time that each one of us got to spend with our dad. Excuse me. He loved to share knowledge of life. We all really miss him. Yeah, right.
When tears run down the glasses and you smear up in your head. It's terrible.
You didn't have it?
But, so, you know, Dad was the one who he loved ice fishing and stuff also. And we always joke when we say, you know, Dad's up in heaven right now teaching all those angels how to ice fish in the clouds. But, and back to my story a little bit. 1993, I was in a car accident, went through some neck surgery, and had problems with tingling in my fingers after the neck surgery, which went away after a few years. And then in 2010, I took a nasty spill when I was out hunting. I was walking in for a day hunt with a full load pack and hutch on my shoulder, and slipped and fell. And then on my shoulder and ribs, and bruised and pretty bad. In fact, my brother-in-law, for the rest of that hunting season, joked with me and said that they're going to tie antlers on my head and use me as a decoy in the woods. yeah, pretty crazy family. Summer 2011 is when I started having problems with my arm strength. I sort of blew it off in the beginning, thinking that was from prior injuries. And then got into 2012, I started getting increased muscle spasms and cramping. And our family, seen this before, so without being diagnosed, you sort of have an idea what's going on. And sort of in our family anyway, when we think about articulations, it's the F word. Nobody likes to talk about. But you get the twitching, the problems with muscle loss after that. And so our family, even our kids, watch for that item all the time. Each of us, when a muscle jumps, we always worry about the fact that it could be ALS. But after discussing this with Kathy, we get into an area where we talk about, could it be this disease hitting our family again? And there's 3 of us of the 9 kids that have it now. So you hold tight to scenarios that it's not this. But the hard part, for a lot of us is when we take a look at the things that are going on in our life, when we watch it, we look and I really appreciate the doctors today talking about debunking some of the things, but then also looking at things that we can do as an ALS community to try to get better at finding out what we can do to really help find a cure for this disease. Because when you first get diagnosed with it, or before I was diagnosed, I had prostate cancer. I was diagnosed with that last spring and had surgery on that right away. Everything turned great on that one. They got everything right off the back. Didn't have to go through any of the chemos or anything else. So that was a complete success. And then right after that happened, then in July last year, I was doing some yard work out in the yard, and I noticed I had loss of strength in one arm. And through the loss of strength, and as soon as I started getting the articulations more often and everything else, the loss of strength, I just called my doctor right away through the VA, and she said, hey, we're going to get you in to see neuroscience right away down in Milwaukee. That was the first time I met Dr. Burkhouse, and came in. I was diagnosed later last year in July, I think it was, with that. But, so of course, if I'm going through the VA, I'm a veteran. So I was in the Marine Corps for 8 years, which, in this case is sort of a cure, a curse on one side and a blessing on the other side. A curse meaning that ALS runs, I believe it was Dr. Burkhouse said earlier, ALS runs 2 to 1 in the military. So your odds are twice as likely to get it. And then with familiar running in our family as strong as it does, if I was a Las Vegas, bookie, this is one bet I wouldn't take. Okay? But, so, when you take a look at everything and you start saying, okay, how does this all piece together? We're very fortunate. I think we've got a very strong research team in this area, and I'm very grateful for all the doctors who are caring for me, the diagnosis team that helped support them. I mentioned each of them by name in this room. They know who they are. They are fantastic. We couldn't have a better support group around here. And so, but one of the most difficult things when I was first diagnosed was, how do you tell the family, how do you tell the kids, and run through all that. And we brought up, we let everybody know right away, and then shortly after that, I started doing something crazy. Anybody here make a bucket list? Okay? And I wanted to make sure that my wife Kathy was reading, so the first thing I put on my bucket list at the very top was a threesome. I guess I got that jokerness from my mom and my dad, right? My wife Kathy sort of rolled her eyes at me and she said, that one's not happening. She crossed it off the top of the list, right? And my birthday was shortly thereafter that, And we walked in, we're sitting down at the restaurant, and we're sitting there, and Kathy's sitting across from me, and my mom's over here, and my two sisters are over there, one of my brother-in-laws, and we're getting ready to have a thing, and also my two daughters come walking in. I could hear them come in the back of the restaurant laughing and sort of singing as they come through. And I turn around and look, and here they got a blow-up doll they're carrying along with them. And they sort of slapped that blow-up doll right down between me and Kathy and said, "There's your threesome, Dad." I guess that one sort of backfired, huh? But yeah, it's a pretty crazy and fun family. The second half, though, of this list was really to pass on the traditions and that Dad had passed on to us. So Kathy and I went out and we bought a boat this spring and plan on getting out doing a lot more fishing. That kind of stuff seems to get a lot more important all of a sudden, doesn't it, Ken? So, but we plan on doing a lot more fishing as soon as the ice comes off the lakes around here one of these days. But, so I'm teaching Kathy right now how to manage the boat, go over all that areas. First thing I do is teach her how to take her pink gloves off when she takes the fish off the hook. We're working on that one yet. But one of the biggest challenges that we look at, on the bucket list and everything else, it's really more about helping friends and family and building memories more than anything else. But the one thing that's not on the bucket list is a big desire might be an advocate for a cure of this disease. Without a cure, there's little hope for those that are diagnosed in the future. Our family has read many books about ALS, and people that have changed their lives, or slowed down the progression of this disease. Kathy and I started to make a lot of changes in my diet. She also helps me with she filled my different pills or vitamins I take, and she fills my little containers up, make sure, okay, Jim, you take your pills tonight, and keeps me online with that stuff. My sister Cindy, is always calling me and seeing if I've done my exercise and take my vitamins. But it's a new way of life, okay? But with the people that we know, friends, family, our caregivers, it's very doable. And, we're looking at different study groups. In fact, one of the study groups I was looking at, talking to Dr. Burkhouse at my last appointment, and I was considering going in for a study group that he's doing right now. But because of the cancer that I had a year ago, it kicked me out of it. So I'm looking into a stem cell one right now with different areas. So we're always looking for a cure on it. I'm also switched over to a gluten-free diet. Burger King, not having that no more is killing me. You drive by and it's like, oh God, that would be so good right now. Okay, and then also as far as experience tells me that too many rum and cokes just takes too long to recuperate. I pay for it very dearly with cramps in my arms. And then being from Wisconsin, not having that beer on the weekend, that's a tough one sometimes. To kick back on a Friday night when you get home and pop a cold one open and sit back and just relax. But again, what I'd really like to appreciate, my sincere appreciation for the medical profession and all the caregivers that are in this room. You are really helping us understand the disease and our fight as we go forward. And you guys are fighting right alongside of us. If it wasn't for you guys, this would be a lot harder journey. And in closing up, like I was saying, I was in the Marine Corps for 8 years. And one of the things that sort of ingrained in me from the Marine Corps is some of the sayings that they have there. One of them is "Scepter By," which is always faithful, which is the way that we feel toward fighting this disease going forward. Thank you very much.
While she's setting up, I just want to tell you this is my first speech ever, so if I pass out, somebody please pick me up. Hi, I'm Cindy Espleda. I'm 58 years old and I have ALS. I have 4 children, Sonia, Candace, Tiffany, and Colin. Sonia is my oldest and she lives in Milan, Italy. She teaches English as a foreign language. In fact, this summer in August, my sister Sharon and I are going to fly to Italy and spend 2 weeks with her. Candace is married to Eric Lee and she lives in Rochester, Minnesota.
She has two beautiful babies, Emma, 3, and Jake, 1. Being a grandma is wonderful. Spending time with them is very big on my agenda. Tiffany is a staff sergeant in the Air Force. She is a flight attendant for the blue and white jets out of Washington, D.C., and flies our military dignitaries all over the world. She just got back from being deployed in Kyrgyzstan for 6 months. She's back in Hawaii for 5 months, then she is stationed in Germany for 2 years. She has been in the military for 10 years. Colin and his wife, Alina, live in Dresser, Wisconsin, and work in the Minneapolis area. Colin is the safety director for a large construction company. I was divorced for many years. I know what it's like to struggle and make a living with 4 children depending on me. I'm remarried now and have been for 9 years to a wonderful man, Bob. He has 4 children, all girls, Janelle, Becky, Crystal, and Olivia. We live in a small town in northern Wisconsin. Minocqua is a very popular destination for vacationers, fishermen, and hunters. We are fortunate enough to be able to live there and make a living. I work at the Marshfield Clinic as a health information specialist for the last 10 years. Bob sells packaging material to the food industry for a company out of Canada, Pack All Packaging, and works from home. He travels a lot as his territory is the Midwest. 4 years ago, our dreams came true, and we built a home on Marion Lake, a small lake, a 75-acre lake. We enjoy kayaking, swimming, fishing, paddleboarding in the summer, and in the winter, we snowshoe and cross-country ski around our lake. My favorite thing is to take my kayak and a cup of coffee in the morning and go out on the lake and chase the loons around. It's very peaceful. I also enjoy hiking, rollerblading, knitting, and reading. With 8 children between Bob and I, we come from big families. We have a very ending revolving door. I saw my first vesiculations in March of 2012. No one had to tell me what I was seeing. My sister Peggy and my father had the same symptoms. I was firmly diagnosed in August of 2012. I discussed my options at that time with the neurologist, and he basically had no answers, except stay healthy and hope for the best. At first I was scared to death. How do you explain this to your children? How do you explain it to your husband? I lost a lot of sleep trying to figure out how to tell them. How do you tell your husband he is now and until the end of time your caregiver? That really sucks. Bob was very supportive and was for the most part accepted everything I have added to my protocol. He has had a few moments, like when I asked him not to fertilize his beloved lawn or put insecticide around the house. How do you tell your children that because you have familial ALS, that now it can possibly be passed down to them? Every reaction was different. Lots of tears, lots of questions. My son Colin had the ultimate response. Well, Mom, everybody dies of something. I knew from watching my sister Peggy deteriorate that I had to find a new approach to this disease. So I started to research to try to slow down and stop the progression. The first thing I found was a book called Eric is Winning. He uses a holistic approach. To me, this made a lot of sense. So I started making changes. The first thing I did was attack my mouth. I had the mercury removed, I had a root canal pulled, and a new bridge built to replace the missing tooth. I had a water filter system put on our water. I also had used only green products inside and outside of my house, and I added vitamins to my diet. I exercise every morning for 35 to 40 minutes, and I detox as much as possible. I totally changed the way I eat. I no longer eat food as a source of enjoyment. Now to me, it's medicine. My diet consists mostly of fruits, vegetables, and protein. no grain or sugars. However, every now and then you have to cheat, because otherwise you don't feel normal. I use coconut oil on my body from head to toe every day and throw a couple spoonfuls in my smoothie that I eat every morning. After making all these changes, it still didn't feel like I was doing enough. So back to the computer for more research, and I came up with the Deanna Protocol. If any of you are on the protocol, you know it's very expensive, and that is not covered by insurance. My husband put it in proper perspective when he said, it gives you even one more day of independent living, it's worth it, so go for it. And I was going to talk more about the Deanna Protocol, but I did a lot of scribbling on this paper before I came up to the podium, because I think Dr. Bedlack covered a lot of the things that I was going to say. So I won't cover that material again. I will continue on this Deanna Protocol, because until I think there is something else that makes more sense, it's what I'm doing. Peggy and Jim and I have different approaches to fighting this disease, and I'm finding what we can live with and what we can, in the end, look back and say we fought a good fight. I truly believe that what I'm doing is the best answer for me at this time. We all have one common goal, and that is to stop the progression of ALS, or at least slow it down. We have our children out there hoping one of us has the right answer, and believe me, they are watching very closely. My way of thinking is that it's better to do something than to do nothing and die. I am fighting my life. I am fighting for my life and for the life of my children and the rest of our family. I believe that we need to have a positive mental attitude and remember that our body hears everything that our mind is thinking. Positive mental attitude and prayer are the foundation for an improvement program. We must believe in what we are doing, then pray to God for help to heal our bodies. We must believe that we can influence the healing process. Trust in God. He will lead the way. And remember, don't miss the sun today, worrying about the rain coming tomorrow. Thank you for listening to my story.
After your first one, I got to my first one. I couldn't pass it.
Hi, I'm Peggy, and I've been living with ALS for 12 years. The end. That was the end. I have been blessed with 3 wonderful children, Mike, Eric, and Lindsay. I have watched them grow and become successful young adults. Last June, my youngest and only daughter, Lindsay, graduated from Eau Claire as a registered nurse and is working and living in Minneapolis. But she's still a die-hard Packer fan. And in July, my husband and Jerry and I celebrated 30 years of marriage. Then in October, my middle son Eric got married to Megan. He works full-time at Coding Excellence and is a volunteer fireman for 2 townships. My oldest Mike got married in January, just 2 months ago, to Kendra, and he took over my book of business as an independent insurance broker approximately 5 years ago. Huge milestone in anybody's life. But especially mine, because when I was diagnosed, Lindsay was in grade school. And I was told to go home and get my affairs in order. Jerry and I purchased land out in the country shortly after we were married. We were in the process of planning our dream home when I was diagnosed. We still built it, but we made lots of modifications. And at that time, I visited a lot of handicapped bathrooms and what was necessary for healthy living. Well, we built that house, and the two best things that we did to it were put in lots and lots of big windows for sunshine and a big open floor plan. We also own a cottage on the Wisconsin River in Lake Tomahawk, a short distance from Cindy and my brother Jerry. Over the past few years, my husband and children did a lot of remodeling at the cottage to make my haven safe and comfortable as my disease progresses. They are not engineers by trade, but they continue to come up with gizmos and gadgets so I can continue to enjoy pontooning, canoeing, fishing, ice fishing, and traveling with my family and friends. If you saw the picture of me ice fishing, I think I might make $100,000 on World's Funniest Home Video. In 2012, I had the honor of being selected as a Wisconsin ALS advocate to go to Washington, D.C. My daughter Lindsay, and from the ALS Wisconsin Association Board of Directors, Tom Kettler and Ben Becker went to meet with our congressional leaders. With me, I brought a booklet comprised of letters from people living with ALS, their spouses, their mothers, their fathers, their children, their friends, and caregivers. They were stories woven together with love, hope, faith, helplessness, and despair. The letters were small, very small, but powerful glimpse into all the lives of the people affected by this cruel disease. I asked each one of our representatives to read the booklet carefully and to pass it on to each person in their office. In the weeks that followed, I received amazing letters regarding the compassion they felt after reading our personal stories. I think we left a lasting impression. I'm going to talk to you today about something that I feel very important to me after living with this disease for 12 years. And it's communication. I, like everyone around me, everything around me, to stay as normal as possible. If I don't communicate my expectations correctly, I am unhappy, and I am sure that those around me are too. I'm going to give you a small example about miscommunication. I'm going to tell Kathy how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in less than 3 minutes. Okay, first, you take some bread. I guess I should read. Then, well, you better take the twist tie off the package first, and then untwist it, and then take out some bread. Oh, you better just take out 2 slices, because that's all I want. Then you take some peanut butter. Oh, maybe you better unscrew the cap first. And then you take peanut butter and you put it on the bread. Oh, maybe I should tell you to use a knife, because that's important. Put the knife, unscrew the top of the peanut butter jar, pick up the knife, dip it in the peanut butter, and then spread it on the bread. Oh, maybe I should say, spread it on a piece of bread. Do you get my drift? Do you know how many times I've had to repeat myself to my husband, my caregivers, and after I thought about the way I was communicating to them, I thought, no wonder they're confused. Any of us that are newly diagnosed with ALS, when you talk to your husbands, your caregivers, your doctors, anybody that you're involved with, think very thoroughly about what you want to say and then explain it to the best of your capability. Because remember, most of those who care for you are clueless about the way Kathy was regarding my directions. You need to be precise about your disease, how it is affecting you, and what you need, and how others can help take care of you more efficiently, because you will get very fatigued trying to figure it out on your own. I didn't have a need for my caregivers until approximately 7 years ago. I chose the time when people would start rotating in and out of my home. I chose the time when I needed additional help outside the family. I did not wait until it was too late. Again, I wanted to keep our family functioning as normal as possible. My husband leaves for work very early in the morning. By the time I get out of bed, my caregiver is there. In order for the Share the Care program to work, it has to work for me and for my caregivers. I always have to remember that these people are volunteers. Whenever I have a new caregiver, I make sure I have an experienced caregiver with me so we can go over my routine and needs with them. I allow them to see what a day of caregiving looks like and what might be asked of them. It allows them the opportunity to pick and choose what they are comfortable doing or not doing. I never realized how many different ways people fold towels and socks. But that's okay, as long as they end up in the right drawer. The word dignity has taken on a new meaning for both me and my caregivers. I feel like Miss Hollywood because each day I have a new hairdo. Some good, some not so good. But that's not important. What is I'm healthy. We have laughter, we have tears between us. Jerry stays healthy, my husband, because he doesn't have to work, clean, do the laundry, and cook, in addition to taking care of me. Those things are all done by my volunteer caregivers. He puts in long work days to provide for us. The time we spend in the evening is much more relaxed because neither of us are overwhelmed. I think it is important for ALS people to get out into their communities as often as possible. Check out the handicapped accessible eateries, enjoy the movies and theater. There are more people providing handicap accessibility in public places now more than ever. The only way to find out is to call and ask. Even if you take vacations, you can line up wheelchairs between flights and rent wheelchairs at destinations. You are only limited by the depth of your imagination. So stay active. Stay active as long as possibly can. Remember, being in a wheelchair does not limit you to the confines of your home. When you first order your wheelchair, make sure your next step is looking for the handicapped vehicle. If your arms are getting weak and your voice is going, you should already be looking at an eye gaze machine, computer. If you're having problems toileting, be proactive and get up a day. You have to stay 1, if not 2 or 3 steps ahead of this disease, because it will keep you healthier and happier than trying to play catch up. In closing, I want to say that as a family, we are very proactive in our community. We give a lot of talks that I drag them into, but they're all for the good. Well, I am on a mission to make this disease well known, so we're all on the same bandwagon. The Wisconsin ALS chapter does a lot of great things for us. They offer so much good advice, and the closet they sponsor offer free equipment of all sorts. So don't be afraid to ask, because knowledge is power. Thank you.
I'm Kathy Kapner. I'm the 3rd oldest of the 9 mistakes, and I do not have ALS. Peggy, Jim, and Cindy's stories are all woven within one family, my family. I am here today to speak on behalf of all those touched in any way by those who have ALS. Yes, we hurt along with you. We see the losses you experience, and our heart aches as each one of your muscle groups shut down. We feel your anger and sense your helplessness at the loss of independence when you have to retire from good jobs, stop driving, and begin applying for aid. We sense your humiliation and loss of dignity when you can no longer dress yourself, have to be toileted, and have to be fed. We see your sorrow when friends stop calling because you're too much trouble to bring along. We also know your personal struggles with depression. We know you cry silent tears behind closed doors. We understand that there are many days you would rather die. But please, continue your fight. We will be there to help. As a family, we know how much of what ALS patients endure is seen and unspoken. We know the agony you feel because you may not see a child graduate, can't hug your grieving child, can't hold a grandbaby, can't pucker up to kiss your spouse or raise your arms to hug them. We know those with ALS feel overwhelming sense of loss physically and emotionally for the lives you had and can never have again. Excuse me. We know you pray that you can carry the burden alone so that your family does not have to endure it. For our family, we add another line to that prayer. Please, God, do not let this disease affect anyone else, especially our children. I can't imagine my mom having gone through the loss of her husband and now having to endure the pains of watching her children suffer. If you could hear the personal, unspoken, united prayer of the Weber family, it would continue with, why us? Why our family? Why so many? Please, God, please, no more. Yes, we're strong, but even the strong get weary. We don't have a choice in who this disease will affect. We do, however, have a choice in how we respond. We were taught by our parents to be strong and to be positive. They always told us, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep going. They demonstrated an inner strength and love for life that has filtered down through each one of us. Our choices are based on love, hope, and family. Do you remember where you were when 9/11 hit? And if you're old enough, the Kennedy assassination, more recently, the Marathon bombing? I know where I was at each moment. My siblings were diagnosed. Peggy, in my kitchen. Cindy, next to my pond in the backyard. Jim, in my office. I always felt like I'm falling into a familiar dark hole. I'm strong, But there are times when even people who love ALS patients need a release. I hurt to the core of my being, knowing what they would have to endure. Those were moments I allowed myself before grabbing my bootstraps. The tears still come, but most of them are replaced with determination to make a difference, not only in the lives of my siblings, but all who have ALS. After my father's death, Northwestern University in Chicago called. They informed me that they suspected Dad had a unique form of ALS called familial. A new word in our family. Yes, it means hereditary. It's like inheriting blue eyes, only we inherited the deformity that creates ALS. Not quite as becoming as blue eyes. It was hard losing our father, but ALS had just become so much more personal. We realize now that this disease could affect our children. Our conversations turned from lament to how do we find or help find a cure. Yes, we want to slow progress. Yes, we want to help those with ALS with medical assistance, but more than anything, our family wants to find a cure. I never want to hear the words, "Mom, I have ALS." Neither do any of my siblings, including Jim, Cindy, or Peggy. We had to make a difference. Late in 2005, I got a call from a distant cousin asking if the family had been contacted about the work being done at Marshfield Clinic. Marshfield had expressed an interest in our family because of the reoccurrence of ALS. My mom and 4 of the 9 mistakes made a road trip to investigate. We were amazed to see our family tree as part of the work being done there. We climbed on board immediately. We organized a blood draw by sending letters to our relatives. We wanted to add our family DNA to the work already in progress. In total, 70 people showed up that day at my mom's house to give blood. The work there at Marshfield still continues, and we still continue to get updates on it. That year, just before Christmas, we decided to organize a fundraiser for ALS research. We were a ragtag group of 10 women who met for the first time. We were armed with a common purpose and a single motto, go big or go home. We've all heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it took a village, 2 huge dedicated families, and all of our friends. We set a lofty goal of $50,000. We called it Fishing for a Cure in honor of our father. Now we had to figure out how we were going to raise the money. None of us had any experience. We had paper to lay out ideas and a lot of erasers. We just started throwing ideas out. We agreed it would be held at the Lions Park near Peg's home under the big top. Before we left that night, we looked at the talents we had and decided how to divide up the task. I want to thank God personally for not giving all people the same talents. We needed the full spectrum, and we used it. We all helped get the items donated that we had on raffles. We looked up business directories and divided it up. We all had lists. Peg made the calls to the largest businesses to try to get major sponsors. She was a salesperson, that was her talent. Our volunteers drummed up the rest. So many of the items in the auctions were handmade by very talented people. Knitted, painted, quilted, and assembled. One young man who had very little to give made outdoor benches from logs. A friend brought in a painting the morning of the benefit. The oil was still wet. It sold on our live auction raffle for $800. One man made a beautifully handmade hutch Our sister Sharon threw pots for a week. She's an artist. A display she called Women of Strength. Each piece of pottery had a buttocks and bosoms and a large space to continue saving. She called it paying it forward. In addition, people donated items from their businesses, rounds of golf, gift certificates, services, hotel stays, jewelry, toys, carpets, fishing and camping gear and sporting equipment. Many donated personal items, Packer tickets, beloved Milwaukee Bucks tickets, prints, bikes, autographed items. We filled up one entire tent with raffle items. An area business purchased the four-wheeler for our raffle. Bakeries donated cookies, and my mom baked for a week before, just making cookies. People came out of the woodwork to volunteer. They were friends of friends. They helped with our silent auction, bucket raffle, paddle wheel, kids games, 50-50 raffles, live auction, bachelor auction, parking, registration, food service, bartending, grilling, raffle ticket sales, security, and trash and restroom cleanup. One lady solicited adult beverage donations, put them in a wheelbarrow, and called herself the Desperate Housewife. It was her brainchild and her donation to our cause. She alone raised over $1,000. A family brought in a petting zoo for free. Several people organized the Army of Volunteers. An area football team came in and put up our tents and took them down. An electrician donated his time to light up the area. The only time the words exhausted, fulfilled, brain dead, and energized belong in the same sentence is when you finished an event this size. We raised our glasses in praise to God. At the end of the evening, our DJ stayed and played for our family, teams, and volunteers. We were all on a hay wagon dancing to We Are Family. And at that point, we truly were. A week later, we had the final count. We had cleared $124,000. We all agreed it had been fulfilling, but a lot of work, and we didn't want to do it again. Once was enough. That being said, we know we're not in control. The next year, the event was called Fishing for a Cure, with an S. We split the profit 50-50 between MS and ALS because members of our family had been diagnosed also with MS. Even in a down economy, we still raised over $110,000, which was split 50-50 toward research and finding cures. 2 benefits in 2 consecutive years, raising approximately $234,000. An area priest the next day proclaimed, "Something amazing happened in our community yesterday." In 2009, shortly after our last benefit, Peggy was to the point where we had to get involved in her care. She was losing the use of her arms. I had learned a program when I assisted a dying classmate. It was a pilot program being tried by an area hospital. It was a program called Share the Care and was created by 2 women assisting a friend with cancer, Kathy Capasalo and Sheila Warnock, who have been praised by many for their wisdom in documenting what they felt worked. We picked from the detailed advice and pieces that Peggy would need. Our Share the Care program has been in place for nearly 5 years. We have about 50 volunteers. Peggy's needs aren't constant. When Jerry, her husband, works or needs a break, her volunteers are there. Peggy has been an ambassador for this program and is trying to get the word out to people. Yes, the program does work. It's life-giving to everyone. Each person who signs up can do as little or as much as they wish to. They can sign up for areas that they feel comfortable. Caregiving, shopping with Peg, taking Peg to her appointments, helping with yard work, decorating for the holidays, doing laundry, bringing in a meal. The program works because everyone does a little and no one person is overwhelmed. Share the Care involves 4 levels of volunteering. The first one is the organizers. This is Peggy's sisters. We set up the program and keep the schedules and paperwork updated. Second one is the weekly schedulers. We have 6 teams, 2 per team. Each week a member of one of the team calls Peggy on a Thursday to see what she needs the following week. They schedule her and let Peggy know who will be there each day. Number 3 are our volunteers, our Army. Some assist weekly, some will help with daily care, some can only make the weekends. Each person's availability and areas they'd like to help are listed so that the weekly schedulers know who to call depending on Peggy's needs. The 4th area is free floaters. They're the people who can't commit to a schedule but are there to assist with things like Christmas gift wrapping. My mom is 80 years young. She's a free floater. She organized a group she calls the Merry Maids. They are her elderly friends. Every other week they arrive at Peggy's house singing. They do all Peggy's light housekeeping, enjoy a visit with her, and when they're done, they leave singing. They give where they can. So what makes a program like Share the Care work? 3 things. First, it levels the load for everyone. Volunteers can change their schedules as needed due to life circumstances and availability. Second, those being cared for need to be in control where possible. The worst thing you can do when someone is ill or handicapped is take away their freedom of choice. We suggested things to Peggy and she told us flat out no. And when she says no, she also stomps her foot. And she'd say, no, I'm not ready. Don't push, or the recipient will retreat. The 3rd thing, everyone gains something. This is not a program for recipients only. It's also a program for the volunteers. Each person needs to take something away from any volunteer program. I have talked to many of the volunteers. They never talk about the things they do. They always tell me about the blessings they have received. It's the same with Peggy. She calls her caregivers her angels. Peg says, without my angels, I would have become depressed many years ago. Caregiving has been my walk since I helped with my father. It's not for everyone. Each person has their own gifts. Learn to recognize yours. Matthew Kelly, an excellent speaker and author, has stated, we need to become the best version of ourselves. It is through giving of oneself to another with love that we accomplish that. It is not words of love. It is not the love of theory. It is the love of action. God bless and thank you.
Will you please join with me in thanking both of the families for their wonderful stories of courage, hope, and strength.
Well, I also want to thank Ken and Shirley and their family, and Jim, Cindy, Nancy, and Peggy, and what an amazing presentation. And thank you, because this isn't easy to do, to get up here and talk, and so we really, really appreciate you being here. Well, I think that's our program for today, surprisingly. And I just, again, want to thank all of our presenters today and the important work that they do. And Dr. Bedlack, who is still here, and just pleased that you could stay the whole time, so that's been wonderful. Your presentation was amazing, and just thank you for your work in ALS Untangled and just in general. So thank you again. Thank you to Dr. Barkhouse and the clinic teams for their continued care and commitment to those with ALS and their families. And I have to give a shout out to the best care services staff ever. Robin, Carolyn, Diane, Janet, and Carolyn. Thank you. And a huge thank you to all of our exhibitors today. I think we've already gotten several commitments for next year, so that's fantastic, and a lot of them will be with us at the walk in October. And thank you to the Sheraton for doing an outstanding job again. I know we had some cold and some freezing people, and we're hoping we got warmer as the day went on. And thank you to all our volunteers. If we didn't have you, this wouldn't go on. I have to just say a little special thank you to the videographer in the back, my son Daniel, who he's a substitute videographer that I had to get up at 6:30 this morning. So for a 20-year-old, that's not so easy. So thanks, Dan. So before, just want to draw your attention to the red forms on the table. We listen to what you have to say on those evaluations, so please, 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 fill out, put any ideas. We really take into consideration ideas for next year. So if you could fill those out, just turn them upside down and we'll collect those. And finally, I just want to thank all of you for being here today. Just know we will continue to work very hard on your behalf until there is an end to this disease. So thank you, drive safely, and it was wonderful to see everyone.